Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this month's Scrutiny Panel meeting. The fire alarm procedures are, if the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices down the main staircase, opposite the lifts in the foyer, assemble in Hawley Square on the green, and officers will assist and advise you when it's deemed safe to return to the chamber. Would everyone present please ensure that they have their mobile phones turned to silent and they're not used to make or receive phone calls whilst this meeting is in progress. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed for the members of the public, and the meeting will also be recorded and subsequently broadcast on the internet. Does anyone intend to film the meeting? That's a no. And if any, have we got any members of the public? We do have one, so I'll run through it. Any member of the public who objects to the possibility of being filmed may wish to take this opportunity to leave the meeting. I would advise if filming takes place, anyone in attendance in the public areas may have their image captured. And I urge anyone filming proceedings to avoid filming members of the public, particularly if there are children present. Okay, are there any members who wish to speak under 20.1 this evening? And that's a no. And I've not received any requests for public speaking. Is there anyone in the public gallery wishing to speak on an item on the agenda? You do. Can I just take your name, sir? James Hose. And which item did you want to speak on? Item 4. Okay, thank you. Are there... Apologies for absence. I have Councillor Cupp being replaced by Councillor Manners, Councillor Christian Byatt sent his apologies, as well as Councillor Packman. Are there any declarations of interest? That's a no. Okay, moving on to the minutes. To approve the minutes of the scrutiny... Yes, Councillor.
Just clarify.
Sure. Yep.
I have a relative who works in financial management with your leisure. The item on the leisure centre at Ramsgate involves financial benefit to your leisure. Could I just clarify whether I'm going to need to recuse myself? There's no direct benefit there.
What relative is it?
Sorry?
What relative is it?
Sister.
Sister.
She's finance manager at the Finance and Communities Manager.
She doesn't live with you?
No. No.
I think there's no benefit to yourself.
That's fine.
Thanks. I'll just call the benefit.
Okay.
And I'll use that next time.
To approve the minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny Panel meeting held on the 12th of March 2024, a copy is attached to the agenda pack. Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Davis, and a seconder. Councillor Austin, and all members agree? Okay. Item 4 is the annual community safety review. Would members please note that we are looking at this evening because as well as the Overview and Scrutiny Panel, this panel is also the Crime and Disorder Committee for the Council. Who knew? So we are accepting this report this evening on behalf of the Council as the Crime and Disorder Committee. I've got a member of the public who would like to speak, so I'll call on Mr. Host to come, and if you come down to the microphone.
Come over there, might be, because otherwise you're going to have to climb over the thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Or the one on the end. Oh. He's gone that way. That's fine. He's fine.
Right, my name is James Hose. I live on Nethercourt Estate, and I've been corresponding with David Green, who's my local councillor, and also to the police over quite some months. My concerns is about communication and community engagement, and I've spoken about, also written to the Thanet Community Safety Group. David contacted me about this meeting tonight. I wrote back to him, if I can read this very short reply to him. Thank you for forwarding details of the meeting on the 16th. He mentioned about the Community Safety Partnership meeting. I said one glaring omission in the Thanet Community Safety Partnership is community. Within the annual Community Safety Briefing, item 4, page 2, under Equality Act, it states consultation and participation. Authorities should involve diverse community members in a strategic assessment process. This promotes inclusivity and responsiveness to community needs. As things stand, this is not happening. The community, i.e. residents, are locked out and ignored. While TCSP may pay lip service to this requirement by holding community meetings every 3 months, These have deteriorated to online events on Facebook where residents cannot engage in any meaningful way other than via a keyboard. Other in-person events via street stalls may promote the existence of the partnership but are not conducive to engagement or debate. While the Crime and Disorder Act requires the partnerships to engage and consult with the other partner agencies, it also requires that each partner agency should work to their areas of expertise. The community would not expect the police to empty bins or the council to put out fires. It is understandable that councils as statutory authorities concentrate on the Crime and Disorder Act to fulfil their duties in regard to crime prevention. As with all laws, new legislation is enacted which also needs to be considered where it may impact on current practice. Antisocial behaviour covers a multitude of sins and all partner agencies are called together to best address them. With a population of over 140,000 residents, Thanet will be personally aware of issues within the community far sooner than the police or the council. They are the eyes and ears on the ground and need to be included and consulted. Communication and community engagement rests on the police under the requirements of Section 34 Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act 2011 under the heading Engagement with Local People. A chief officer of police must make arrangements for obtaining the views of persons within each neighbourhood in the relative police area about crime and disorder in that neighbourhood. That goes on to require information about policing in the area to be provided and regular meetings to be arranged to facilitate engagement by the community. It is clear that from the above, the main responsibility to engage with the community rests with the police under this Act. The police are the public and the public are the police, purely in principles. Using the partnership approach in conjunction with the SARA model of problem solving, issues can be addressed. One size does not fit all. What is of concern in Margate will be different to that in Cliffsend, even from one ward to another. Kent Police subscribe to My Community Voice as a two-way communication tool. In Thanet, police seem reluctant to use it. Without resident involvement, police will continue to be a reactionary presence. The primary objection of efficient police is a prevention of crime. Numerous reports have highlighted the efficiencies of the police, and as Baroness Casey said, police could do better. Perhaps the Scrutiny Committee could assist by calling them to account as a critical friends. How many councillors have met with their ward officer or even know their name? Councillors are visible, approachable and accountable, so why not the police? That is all, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Host. Thank you. I'm now going to present Penny Button to introduce her report. Hopefully you can get your answers there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So the Thanet Community Safety Partnership is a multi-agency partnership. TDC don't actually lead it. We are the ones that pull together all the information, and it's truly multi-agency across the department. So our chair of our executive panel is Chief Inspector Swallow, who is here today to present our strategic assessment and the plan for the coming year. So I'm going to hand over to Ian. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Penny. Just to reintroduce myself, my name's Ian Swallow. I'm the Chief Inspector for Thanet Police. My responsibility is all uniform and neighbourhood policing for the Thanet district. And as Penny said, I chair the Executive Committee of the Community Safety Partnership, which oversees all activity undertaken by the partnership in relation to all these activities. I'll start by sort of quickly addressing the comments made by Mr. Hose. Mr. Hose and I are no strangers to each other. We've had lots of conversations in various forums regarding the concerns he's raised. I will go through the strategic assessment, which will help you answer some of those questions, hopefully. But off the bat, what I would say as a headline is that Kent Police comply, as does the Community Safety Partnership, with our statutory obligations around engagement. We hold neighbourhood engagement events on a quarterly basis, which is statutorily correct. Yes, most of those are online, but that's based upon feedback received from the majority of the community on how they wish them to go ahead. It is a requirement I place upon my beat officers to hold at least one public engagement event in each ward per month. That is an obligation put upon us by our headquarters engagement policy. That goes ahead. And actually, in most parts, in most of our wards, and again, I allude to a comment made by Mr. Hose, what we tend to call our high earner wards, so our busiest wards, there is a higher level of engagement that goes on within those wards as well. In relation to knowing the beat officers knowing their ward councillors, I make it absolutely mandatory for my officers to engage with their community. So I'm hoping that most of the elected members are aware who their ward officer are, have spoken to their ward officer, and I run a very open door policy that if there are any concerns, then I'm more than happy to take that forward and address it with my community safety unit, which is the police side of the community safety partnership. So I've kind of sort of given you a quick snapshot of my response to those concerns raised, but I'm happy to answer any more questions as we go through. So the strategic assessment, as you've got in front of you and is up on the screen, I don't intend to go for it word by word because we'd be here some time if I do so, but I'm happy to sort of go through the main topics and give you the headlines from each side of it. And if there are any questions as we go, then of course, Chair, I'll leave it to your discretion if you wish for me to address those questions. Or I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. But in essence, we're required to produce a strategic assessment on a yearly basis reviewed. This is the 2024. The figures and priorities within this are based upon crime statistics from going up until the end of 2023. This is slightly different than how Kent Police would measure. We measure on a fiscal basis, so April to April. But this assessment will be going probably more straightforwardly for a layperson from the 1st of January to the 31st of December. So the key priorities of the Community Safety Partnership, primarily made up of officers from Kent Police and the local authority in partnership with the other statutory agencies, including KFRS and Kent County Council, are reducing serious violence, which is working with agencies and local communities to increase early intervention, education to support prevention. Safer People, which is a problem-solving approach to protecting vulnerable people and reducing crime and reoffending, and Safer Places, which are building stronger communities through education, engagement and enforcement. The next couple of slides on the report around the demographics, which again I won't go into the demographic side of it. It talks about the deprivation and the makeup of Thanet in comparison to the rest of the county and the country. Again, this report is available for anyone to have a read, so I don't intend to go through the percentages of demographics on the island unless you wish me to do so. So I'll move on to the serious and violent crime slide. So Thanet sits within the East Division. So for us, East Division is Thanet, Dover, Canterbury, Ashford, Folkestone and Hythe. There were 423 serious violent crimes in division, that's entire division in 2023, compared to 456 in 2022, so that's a decrease. And in Thanet, we accounted for 112 of these, which is 22% of that figure, reduced by 30% from 2022, which is an extremely significant reduction of violent crime over a year period. What I would say in context as well is that now we're moving to the end of April 2024. What I can say is that figure is continuing to drop. We are seeing a continual drop of violent crime. So just in that that academic year, that's an 18.2% improvement on last year. What you will find throughout this assessment and report is that Thanet will inevitably appear what it appears on here top, and what I mean by top is the highest crime figures in the county. Thanet is a very vulnerable district in terms of crime and disorder. What this report doesn't take into account of, which Kent Police stats often do, are the statistics produced by Medway. Being a unitary authority, obviously they won't appear, but in policing terms, Medway is a busier and more vulnerable district than Thanet, but in terms of Kent on its as a standalone, Thanet will tend to appear higher than the other districts. So going on to the next slide. Violent crimes against a person, 7,340 violent crimes against a person recorded in Thanet in 2023. That accounts for all violence, so we're talking from the most serious violence down to what we would colloquially call common assault, and that's 26.9% of those recorded in East Kent. This is the greatest number of crimes in all 12 Kent districts, again not including Medway, and 10.3 less crimes recorded than 2022, in line with the average reduction of 9.1 in East Division. So again, although we appear fairly high, it is a really improving picture and a reduction of 10% of violent crime against the person, which is, when we're dealing with significant numbers of crime, 10% is a large amount of crime reduction. And then if you can vaguely see the map at the bottom there, highlights the areas where violent crime is most prevalent. Kent Police operate 3 areas which we focus most of our attention on, and they're called grip zones for us. That's just a term that we use for Kent Police. And our 3 grip zones are Margate Central, Cliftonville West, and Harbour and Eastcliff wards. So as you see, those 3 darker areas, those prevalent darker areas there, would cover Margate Central, Cliftonville West, and the other wards, Eastcliff and Harbour as well. So we are focusing on the right areas there. And of those wards, Cliftonville continues to be the highest at the moment. So moving on to sexual offences. Thanet is ranked highest for number of sexual offences of the 12 districts, with 622 offences reported in 2023. Thanet ranks the highest for rape and sexual offences, but ranks second for serious sexual offences behind Canterbury. Anecdotally, the reason for that is because when we look at serious sexual offences that occur across the board, victims are mostly, understandably, female, and the reason why Canterbury will tend to figure higher is because of the university and student crime. So there was a 7.3% reduction in the number of sexual offences in Thanet in 2023 compared to 2022. This is above the average reduction again for the East Division of only 2.6%. So although, again, I reiterate my messaging that the numbers are fairly high, the reduction of 7.3% is really significant in 2023 and is actually really pleasing in terms of crime reduction for those areas. Moving on to the next one, continuing on sexual offences. Margate Central Ward continues to have the highest number of offences reported in Thanet, followed by Eastcliff Ward and Cliftonville West. Whilst these 3 wards remain the highest reported sexual offences, they've all seen reductions of between 16.2% and 25.4% compared to the year before, which again is significant. There are wards that have gone up, notably Dane Valley Ward has seen an increase. But on the whole, the picture across the entire district is of reduction. Next slide is on possession of weapons. Thanet continues to have the highest number of weapon possessions in the East Kent Division. This number has not changed compared to 2022. On average, there's been a 10.6 increase in recorded weapon possessions in the division. Now, this is a national picture. I'm sure it hasn't escaped most people that possession of offensive weapons, knives and other weapons is certainly a topic that's very keen across the entire nation, especially knife offences. We can talk wider later about all the good stuff that's going on in order to reduce this. But what I will add to this slide is that possession of weapon offences includes all offences, so it's not just about carrying weapons in the street, it also includes any offences committed, for example, in the home where a weapon has been mentioned. So, for example, a domestic abuse incident where one party alleges that the other picked up an item of household object, that will be recorded as an offensive weapon offence because of the use of weapon in the offending. Over to the next one, so drug offences and county lines. Drug offences are on the rise in Thanet with a 9.9% increase in overall and a 30.6%. That is actually beginning to drop in 2024, I can report. But I think it's fair to say that drug possession, drug use and the selling of drugs is a priority for policing in Thanet. A lot of that is around, as you can see on the second part of that slide, the county lines. And in 2023, 43 suspects of grip recorded offence, so when I say grip, that's the 3 zones that I was talking about, were identified as linked to county lines. There were 4 victims of grip recorded offences that were identified as linked to county lines. The county lines activity is a particular concern for us. I'm sure most people are aware of what that entails, but very quickly, that's offences coming out from the capital via phone line systems, hence the word county line. And we have organised criminal groups in all districts, all divisions, who operate those lines and the drug dealing that goes on as a result. There's a huge amount of work in progress, some of which I can talk about later on. But in essence, that remains a priority for us. Moving on again, safeguarding adult notifications. Number of referrals in Thanet has increased. Despite the substantial increase, Thanet is no longer the district with the greatest number of referrals. Cliftonville West is the ward with the highest number of referrals, followed by Margate Central. So again, those priority grip wards come up. And in last year's assessment, Cliftonville West and Margate Central were 3rd and 6th respectively out of 268 Kent wards. This year, they're 7th and 8th. So we are seeing an improvement. Adult safeguarding referrals is a kind of a victim to itself as well, because as we get better at it, as we work better as a partnership, as we work together to safeguard and protect vulnerable adults, inevitably the number of people you're safeguarding goes up because you're doing a better job at doing it. And then moving on to safeguarding of children, this number of safeguarding of children referrals in Thanet for the year was 2,454. This was a 13.24 increase on the 2,167 referrals in the previous year. Remains the second highest number of referrals in Kent behind Swale. Cliftonville West has the highest number of referrals, followed by East Cliff and Dane Valley. All three were also within the top 10 wards with the highest number. We're aware of the particular vulnerabilities around children and young people in Thanet. The Community Safety Partnership works very, very closely with schools and youth provision to safeguard children. And the contextual safeguarding meeting process, which is run as part of the CSP, focuses on safeguarding. So actually it's been recognised as one of the most robust wraparound safeguarding services in the county, which will explain some of the high number of children that have been safeguarded as a result. Moving on to reducing offending and re-offending. So data shows that all recorded crimes in Thanet across the year had an 8.5 reduction in offending, followed by a further smaller 1% reduction. The reduction in total number of crimes recorded the whole of the East Division compared to 2022. So in summary, East Division as a whole saw good reductions, but Thanet's reductions again were above and beyond the reductions seen in any of the other districts. While Thanet remains the district with the highest crime rate, it did have a higher percentage reduction in crime than 3 out of the 4 other districts. And the latest re-offending rates published show that Thanet's consistently below the national average but above the average for Kent. However, Thanet has a greater number of average re-offences per re-offender than the national average. In essence, what that's showing is that there is a statistic that we use within policing quite regularly, that 75% of our crime is committed by 15% of our people. So that hence that re-offending figure that you have there. So we target repeat offenders both from a method of prosecution but also safeguarding, because a lot of our re-offenders are vulnerable adults as well. But what it does do is it enables us to focus our attention on the persons creating the most crime. Moving on, violence against women and girls. There were 4,152 total incidents of violence against women and girls between November 22 and October 23. This was a 12.3% reduction compared to the previous year, and Thanet has the highest number of VAWC incidents out of the 12 districts. Again, it follows the trend on all other crime types that whilst Thanet is a vulnerable district with higher crime than the other districts, actually our crime reduction over the last year has been significant and higher than the other districts. Domestic abuse. The number of notifiable domestic abuse offences continue to reduce across the division this year. Thanet continues to have the highest number of total notifiable offences across Kent, but has again seen a 14.4% decrease in recorded domestic abuse incidents. Thanet has more than half the number of high-risk referrals this year compared to last year, and has seen a 22.4% reduction in medium-risk referrals. We see this as a really, really good news story in terms of reduction. There is still clearly work to be done with a high domestic abuse rate. Our absolute commitment to reducing violence against women and girls remains, and it remains a Kent Police and a CSP priority. Moving on to looked after children, during the timeframe October 21 to September 22, there was a total of 269 looked after children in Thanet, with the highest number being located in Westgate-on-Sea, followed by Garlinge, then Central Harbour and Viking with 20. That just appertains to where the locations were that do that. 275 looked after children in Thanet, the highest number were located in Cliftonville West, Central Harbour and Viking wards. And of note, Thanet is no longer the district with the most looked after children in Kent. Canterbury now has a larger increase over the last year. Moving on to mental health. So section 136, if you're not aware of section 136, that's under the it's the Act number under the Mental Health Act. That is the power of police to detain someone under the Mental Health Act who is in immediate need of care and control. The number of people who have been sectioned under 136 by Kent Police in Thanet has steadily declined in the last 5 years. And in all mental health clients, the number of mental health clients in Thanet has increased again to 273. Of these, 71.4% are living in the community. Thanet continues to have the highest number of mental health clients in Kent. Margaret Central, Cliftonville West continue to be the wards with the highest number of clients across the past 3 years. Mental health remains a significant challenge to the partnership and to Kent Police. We have some startling statistics about the amount of calls Kent Police go to that has a mental health element to it, I haven't got the exact figure, but it is in the region of 60% thereabouts of all the calls that we go to, full stop, will have a mental health element to it, either victim or suspect. Moving on to safeguarding vulnerability. Number of emergency admissions for all three indicators reduced between 21 to 22 and 22 to 23. Admissions for alcohol and substance misuse remain higher than records from 2018 to 19. Alcohol and substance misuse admissions continue to be higher in Thanet than the other district. And admissions by age follow the general pattern for Kent. Age 30 to 44 was the largest age group for substance misuse. 45 to 65 the highest number of admissions than age 34 to 44 for self-harm. Alcohol admissions were highest from Ramsgate residents and elevated in Margate and Cliftonville residents. Substance misuse admissions, the number of emergency admissions for assault reduced substantially for Thanet residents. Of note, this has been a steady increase since COVID, since lockdown. We've seen sort of anecdotally and through working with our health partners that alcohol and substance misuse has increased quite significantly since lockdown and since COVID. And whilst it is beginning to flatten out the curve now, and we're seeing it sort of settling down a little bit, we have noticed that calls to service for this has been very significant since that period for obvious reasons. So on to our rough sleepers. The number of people sleeping rough in Thanet has decreased over the last few years. The rate of people sleeping rough in Thanet is much higher than the national average and average for the South East. That goes without saying, I'm sure, that on many of your wards, councillors, you will have seen rough sleepers. We have a very proactive sort of methodology and safeguarding system around our rough sleepers. We have a policy in Kent Police that we have powers to prosecute rough sleepers under acts and sections that go back to 1824 and 1812. We tend not to use it because it is a sledgehammer to crack a nut, where we strongly believe that these people are on the whole are vulnerable, require support, and hence why we work very closely with our homeless charities and we work very closely with the local authority and the CSP to try and rehome and support these individuals. There are recidivist and repeat offenders within our homeless community, some of whom have been offered support and have refused it, and those individuals have been enforced against in one method or another, and we will continue to do so. Moving on to modern day slavery. There were 248 modern slavery national referral mechanisms, NRM referrals in Thanet in 23 to 24. The outcome of them can be seen in the table up there. It's a little bit small, but in essence, most of them end up with not a satisfactory outcome in terms of prosecution. Some of them do result in prosecution. However, in nearly all the cases, irrespective of the prosecution that takes place, safeguarding has taken place. So we may not find the end product in terms of who the offender was, because often it goes into gangs and organised crime. But what you will find is that a lot of safeguarding has taken place as a result of taking those individuals out of their situations. Moving on to antisocial behaviour. So ASB is a huge part of what we do as a community safety partnership. Thanet sits second for the most instances of ASB within the Kent divisions, and the highest number of ASB calls in East Division, which is perhaps unsurprising given the other crime statistics. After a significant reduction of 36.8% in 2021-22, we've continued to reduce by 10.8%. So basic maths, we've reduced by, pushing up to 40% of our antisocial behaviour in the last 2 years, which is incredible work by the partnership and the officers involved. So we have seen significant reductions across all types of antisocial behaviour. It's measured in different categories, including nuisance use, including rowdy behaviour, etc. But we've seen really significant drop-offs in antisocial behaviour over the last 2 years. Unsurprisingly, that bottom paragraph refers to our ASB spiking in the summer months during school holiday times, and obviously the beaches, Margate Beach, Broadstairs, and Ramsgate to a lesser degree in the summer, increased that spike during that time. The most significant, moving on to the next slide, the most significant increase was in animal nuisance and motor vehicle nuisance, both of which roughly double compared to previous years. Drunken and rowdy behaviour features highly, so does rowdy nuisance gathering in public. So Thanet has had a spike of theft from motor vehicles in our crime category. That's led to an increase naturally of nuisance use being reported on motorbikes. And it goes without saying that the rowdy or nuisance gathering in public and rowdy behaviour is often nighttime economy related, often alcohol related, and related to our summer months on the beaches. So in terms of community reassurance, talking as I did at the top of the presentation about neighbourhood engagement meetings, they're held every quarter in the 4 main towns in Thanet District, Margate, Ramsgate and Broadstairs, including St Peters, Birchton and Garlinge. These meetings are led by members of the community and they're attended by representatives from Thanet Council and Kent Police. I completely understand the comments raised, and this is a moving feast. And it is something that I've spoken about in other meetings as well, that we're always revisiting how we use engagement. We will always tick the box in terms of what we're required to do, but it is my contention and intention that we will continue to improve our engagement and continue to work with the community and listen to any feedback involved. So, for example, the next neighbour engagement panel, I've agreed to take part in that one myself as well, so that I'm able to answer any questions from the community from a district commander point of view. So we do an annual resident consultation. The top 3 things that influence how unsafe people felt included certain areas, locations, news and local media, and the third one which has dropped off. I can't remember what that one. I can't remember off the top of my head what that one was. So bear with me. We'll have to get that slide sorted. But on the whole, 89% felt very safe or safe during the daytime. 50% felt very safe or safe during the night time. There's other statistics that I won't go through there, but on the whole, the feedback that we've had from the resident consultation actually is reflecting that it is an improving picture, and the residents are feeling more confident and happier than they were the previous year, and more confident in reporting incidents to the police.
The third one is how the area looks, i.e. run down empty shops.
There we go. Thank you. So, I won't go through the next conclusion page because it's awfully wordy, but from my own sort of conclusions on that, yes, understandably, Thanet, based upon its vulnerabilities, based upon its demographics and its crime profile, does feature as one of the highest wards and districts within Kent. However, the picture from 2022 to 2023 is vastly improving, and it's improving at a quicker rate than certainly any other district in East Division, but also for most measures any other district in the county. This is really, really impressive work from the partnership and the teams, and actually it's something that we're really obviously really keen to go forward with as we go on. So looking ahead, looking forward for the next, because we have a 3-year plan, a rolling 3-year plan that we work on all the time. Around the 3 key areas: reducing serious violence, safer people and safer places. Again, I won't go through all of those on those boxes, but they all allude and refer to what I've been talking about throughout this presentation, where the challenges lie for Thanet Police. So just as sort of a headline is really around reducing serious violence, the knife crime, which would go into the possession of offensive weapons, assaults, domestic abuse, violence against women and girls and gang violence, as well as mental health, are enablers. And what we mean by enablers are things that will then lead to further crime. So mental health issues within a community will lead to further crime. Drugs possession and use will lead to recidivist crime, acquisitive crime, people committing thefts in order to fund that habit. So the idea being, and our strategy, is to go after the hydra, cut the head off at source, and focus very much on the bigger picture in terms of reducing crime in those key areas. The safer people element is about working really tightly as a partnership, building young people's resilience and adult resilience. We have our contextual safeguarding meetings and vulnerability meetings with the referral mechanisms that go into place to make that happen. Again, we have domestic abuse, mental health and substance misuse, as well as other enablers in there which are barriers and things that we need to tackle to make that happen. And then lastly, safer places. That's about making Thanet a nicer place to be, quite frankly, with tackling antisocial behaviour, improving our town centre, improving housing conditions, especially for our rough sleepers, again looking at the substance misuse and the crime that is associated with our places. We have a public space protection order. I was talking to a couple of yourselves before the meeting, a public space protection order which is rolling out, which will be the most robust and wide-ranging PSPO in the county. Most public space protection orders will cover a small area, i.e. a road or a beach or a square, for example. Thanet's PSPO will be covering the entire district, and it will cover any form of behaviour that will have a negative impact. Well, I say that because it's quite broad ranging. It talks about antisocial behaviour, it talks about alcohol and substance misuse, it talks about dogs and animals, it talks about rough sleeping. So it will enable us as a partnership, and it is very much a partnership process. The police will have powers to issue tickets. The local authority then have the power to prosecute where those tickets aren't paid. So we work collaboratively to tackle these issues, especially in the safer places point of view. That will be really, really important as we move into the summer and we start tackling the issues that happen with visiting people, be it antisocial behaviour on the beach, be it the nighttime economy or dreamland events, which are going to be fantastic this year, but do, of course, present challenges, be it the parking and ASB that goes with the other beautiful beaches that we have in the district, or any issues that we have on the train. So there is a real challenge for Thanet Police and the partnership going ahead this year. Our neighbourhood policing profile is looking healthier. Every single ward now has its own beat officer. There is some doubling up still in terms of some beat officers have more than one ward. The increase of our beat officers will only inevitably lead to improved communications, as Mr. Hose pointed out, and an improved engagement with the public. And as we move into the back end of 2024, we're pretty confident we'll get up to sort of 3/4 to 100% of our officers being in place on all of your wards. And they're all contactable, they're all available on our website, and if you wish to engage with them or any of my team, then you can do via that portal. But equally, I'm always happy to field any questions, or if you come direct to me. Chair, sorry to rattle on, I'll try to get through as quickly as possible, but that's our report.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Penny. Fantastic report, very comprehensive. Members, questions or comments you'd like to make? Hands up everywhere. Councillor Davis first.
I
I'd just like to, and I've made this comment before, but congratulate Ian and his force on the substantial reductions last year, because it's trends, not actual numbers, obviously, that show the efficacy of the process. I do think that the move to warranted officers away from PCSOs on the beat has led to has been a big part of that, because and again I've mentioned before, within 48 hours of that new policy last year, I was witness to an incident in Ramsgate that rather than the PCSOs being hamstrung, the warranted officers were able to effect an arrest, remove the problem, and away. But I'd just like to say, you know, hopefully we'll continue down this route. And it is important, where you said this is a good news story, and I think we need to get the message out more that this is the case. Because the one concern I would just like to mention, I've had a couple of calls in the last few weeks. Now, it may be political because people put stories around with the May elections for police and crime commissioners and so on. However, there was a story doing the rounds and gaining traction that there was this massive increase in violent crime in Ramsgate, particularly against women. Well, in fact, that's the exact opposite of the scenario. So I don't know if there's any way we can assist in getting that story out there, because it's important that people feel, you know, that the perception of safety is obviously probably as important as the actual reality. One other little point I'd just like to make with regard to safe streets, I think KCC could do a lot by increasing the lighting strength, particularly on roads. London Road in Ramsgate is a case in point. Between the dimmed lighting and the tree cover, which is important that we have these nice avenues, but it's like the black hole of Calcutta on those uneven pavements in the evening. There are safety issues, but several, including one of the town councillors lives up there, and Councillor Young, and she's regularly reported how dangerous it is. If we could perhaps encourage KCC to turn the lights up a bit. LED, I don't believe, consumes anything like the power that other systems, and that would go a long way, I think, towards making people feel safe at night while they're transiting. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I don't disagree with any of the points you make there, Councillor, but thank you. Just one point we'd like to make about media strategy when you're talking about, and those incidents in Ramsgate. Last March, it was, we had 3 or 4 incidents where known people assaulted other known people in quite a violent manner. And then we had a couple of incidents later on in the year as well. What I always say when every public meeting I go to, and obviously meetings such as this with professionals, is that most of our violence is known offenders on known victims. Normally, I dare to say, around drug-related issues. As such, it propagates a fear of violent crime within the community that just isn't realistic for the normal member of the public, for the normal community member. The chances of being caught up in that level of violence is very, very slim. We've only had one of those 4 incidents I'm referring to. Only one of those incidents was a member of the public injured who was not directly known to those individuals, and that was a doorman. And it was because he got involved to try and prevent the incident from happening. Other than that, it is generally a very safe place, and I completely concur with you that the media stream doesn't help us with that. And we do put out media messaging, but it's always been a police policy across the board that we don't get into tit for tat. We don't say, no, that's not true, because, you know, it's yesterday's chip paper, if you like. But, you know, we do try and promote good news stories as much as possible. But good news stories always get beaten by bad news stories, unfortunately, because sensationalist reporting will always win the day. And it is unfortunate, but I completely agree. The more we can get out there that Thanet is becoming a much nicer place to be, a safer place to be, the better.
I think we need to be dignified in our silence, but yeah, dignity is difficult, isn't it, at times like that? So we need to be speaking out, and let's up the place, because that's what we're here for, isn't it? So.
Councillor Green.
Yeah, thank you. That was an impressive record of dealing with what I would call serious crime, and I don't dispute that. Although I do note that Thanet is still the highest generally in the county. What I'd like to do is return to the community engagement picture. I mean, I've been a councillor, I think, for about 24 years in different places. And it's never worked, in my experience. Getting 20 people to a community engagement meeting for a town like Ramsgate that has 40,000 residents is not working. It goes up a bit sometimes when there's a particular issue. And I don't think this is the police's fault necessarily. It's the broader community safety community that needs to recognise that it's not working and do something different. Now, I represent Nethercourt Ward, which is a pretty safe, quiet ward on the whole, but it suffers here and there, sometimes more, sometimes less, from people breaking into cars or breaking into houses. That's the sort of crime that most people see. They don't see the other really serious crime. And that's their impression of what happens when they report a crime. Generally speaking, nothing happens. If a car's broken in, it's noted, and to their perception, nothing happens. Now, we need to find a way of reassuring them that something is happening if they report a crime, or if it's not, explaining why, but showing concern. And that's not happening at the moment. Now, it's so bad at the moment that parts of our community are actually patrolling the estate to try and put these people off. Now, I don't like that because it's potentially dangerous, but that's what's happening. So even in a quiet area like Nethercourt, there are problems, and I think those problems could be improved if community engagement was improved. So I think it's part of the district council and the other partners in the community safety area that perhaps should recognise that what they're doing at the moment is not working.
Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ian. That was, I mean, the statistics are very impressive, but they're still very worrying, aren't they? So I've got two or three things. Am I all right with that, Chair? The first one, picking up on what Councillor Green's just said about community engagement. We, as board members, I'm Central Harbour Ramsgate, and I know my local policemen, and we've been out on visits and round the streets and all of that, and it's been really informative. What I don't get routinely is information about when there's a neighbourhood engagement meeting, when we're doing a community survey, which is more the council than the police force. Really, there's information that must be going out amongst your own service, and if that could come to 56 people in the various wards across Thanet, you'd get more of us involved ourselves, but also sharing that information. I've been a councillor for 3 years. That's never happened, apart from on one occasion where we found out about something in advance and we all went rushing out with posters and put them in shops, and we did get more people. It was before COVID, so, you know, things have changed, I know. But I would echo what Councillor Green said about it's not really working very well at the moment, and part of the reason for that is that the information is not getting out there in clear and simple ways that people can see. So you're going to get the same people coming round who've got the same concerns all the time, rather than it broadening out. The second thing I want to say, obviously, Central Harbour Ward, street drinkers. It's a big concern for us. When you're saying we want to make Thanet a nicer place, yes, we do. At the moment, one of the things that stops Ramsgate, which is a fabulous place, being as nice as it could be, is street drinkers, and yet we don't seem to be seeing prosecutions or, anything else. I don't know what's happening. We don't get any information about what's happening, but we see the same people there all the time, and that frightens and worries shoppers. So that's something I'd like to know a bit more about how you're tackling that. And also late licences. I was shocked when I became a councillor to discover that I can only object to a licence in terms of what happens in the premises, what happens out there in the street, the fighting and the stabbing and all the stuff that we know does happen on occasion, sadly. It's only the police who can comment on it, and I'm not seeing as much engagement from the police on those sorts of matters as I would like to see, and I'd like to know your view on that. And finally, I'd like to know a little bit more. You're talking about the 15% of people who are the focus of much of the crime that you're dealing with, and about much of that being mental health and drug related. And I'm wondering, obviously you work with a variety of partners. I'm particularly interested in the health aspects of that. How are you working with health to try to treat and support those people and divert them from criminality? Those are my questions. Thank you.
I'll try and remember them, Councillor. Would you mind just headlining each one? Street drinkers. Okay, so street drinkers. Yes, recognise that is a huge problem for Ramsgate. There have been a fair few prosecutions against our repeat street drinkers in Ramsgate over the last year. I know of at least 4 where protection notices were issued against them. When you issue a community protection warning, or then followed by a community protection notice, once they breach the notice, they then are committing a criminal offence at that point. Drinking in public isn't illegal, but the associated criminality and antisocial behaviour that comes around it can be, which is why we have the CPW, and I call them that, it's easier than saying it all again, CPW and CPN process. We then can move up to what we call a criminal behaviour order, which, if you remember, is the old ASBO, basically, and we can use those. That process is long and drawn out. It does take time, but I can reassure you that I am aware of some of our repeat offenders in Ramsgate who currently have those orders and are being monitored with a view to moving it up. What I would say is, if it's continuing, let us know, and I'll keep hammering my beat officers to go and deal with them robustly, absolutely. So happy to do that. Licensing, yeah. So in terms of police being able to object to licences, yes, we can introduce evidence and information of public behaviour, so behaviour in the street. However, at the council, we have to be very, very careful about the level of evidence that we produce. So, for example, if one of our Ramsgate seafront establishments bid for a late night licence, I could turn around and say that on 30 occasions in the last rolling year there were incidents of disorder on the seafront. I could probably turn around and say, of those 30, 15 were proven to have been people that came out of that particular that premises. I can say that. But what I can't do, unless I have absolute evidence, is to say that it was their fault. So, and that's where I had to be very, very careful, because often, let's take a rocker, for example, to picking one of the pubs at random. So let's say the door staff at Rocker recognise someone in the establishment creating problems, and in terms of their licensing responsibilities, they eject that person. That person then creates disorder in the street. I can't object to Rocker's late licence because they've done the right thing. So, and that's where the difficulty can come, because sometimes we end up vilifying premises for doing what we tell them they must do, and that is to deal with it robustly. Which is why sometimes there is that disconnect between what's occurring in the street, which the residents who live up in the flats, etc., see, versus what I can object to in a licensing hearing.
Thank you. Next thing was working with health services.
Yeah, so health service, the health team are part of the Community Safety Partnership. I think it's fair to say that they're a slightly more sleeping member than some of our key members. I think maybe a wry smile from Penny. It is something that we are working closely on. In fact, one of the things that we can say that we're setting up, there's a health alliance that's just been started. And what's really pleasing is that wasn't started by the police and that wasn't started by the local authority. That was started by the local health team. Dr. Maiden Tilson, who's in charge of the Health Alliance, called it together. So there is, and Penny and I are really keen to make it part of the CSP, bring it into the umbrella of the CSP, that this Health Alliance, which includes all agencies, is about dealing with the long-term issues of people with safeguarding, with health, with mental health issues as a wraparound, as part of the problems that we're dealing with. So that is a real work in progress. And actually, there's only been 2 meetings so far. It's only been running since the back end of last year, but that's something that's very much on the agenda.
Councillor Manners.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that, Ian. It's a very interesting and helpful presentation. I've just got a couple of questions, mostly relating to matters around the beach and the visitors to the beach. We did have Simon, our ward officer, come down and meet me, and also Councillor Munns in Kingsgate. So, it's been very helpful to know that we've got the support and we've got a number on speed dial if there are any immediate issues that we can get a response. Can you just quantify, there has obviously been an upturn, an increase in beat officer availability. Could you just quantify whether that the numbers will be increased upon in the coming year? Also, will they be fully conversant with the PSPO? We had a couple of issues where officers attending the incidents on the beach weren't aware of the PSPO and their powers around that, so that would be particularly useful. Sorry to burden you with lots of questions, but also could you outline the methodology where you'll be working with TDC civil enforcement this year to enforce the PSPO and all the strictures around that? Will there be any action on drink and drug driving? We see a lot of people, I think the technical term is getting messed up on the beach with alcohol, nitrous oxide and marijuana, and then getting in a car and driving home, often at some speed and very often on the pavement. So whether there will be any sort of action days or events to clamp down on that, particularly on warm days, because the problem is these problems occur when you're obviously at maximum stretch with everything else going on, because they tend to occur when the mercury hits 26 degrees or more, and that's obviously when it all kicks off in Margate, Broadstairs and Ramsgate as well. What was it? Oh, and also, final point, just to agree with Councillor Austin, it has been really useful to have ward officers, but I think it would be very useful if they could have a regular communication with their respective councillors to let them know when engagement events are taking place. We have quite good reach on social media and outreach within the community, so we can obviously therefore sort of market that event perhaps more effectively, and it would be useful that councillors could attend those events more often as well. So those were the main points. Thanks.
Can I just answer that with yes? So to deal with the beat officers, full establishment for Thanet, and we'll have the highest number of beat officers in the county, by the way, in terms of coverage. Full establishment will be 24 uniform beat officers for the wards in Thanet. We're currently sitting at 14/15, somewhere around that mark. And the reason why I say it is because one's on a secondment at the moment, but he's nominally on our register. So 15 on paper, 14 in reality. We've got another uplift in May, which should see us another 2 or 3. So I'm looking maybe 16, 17 at that point. And then we're looking at another uplift at the back end of 2024, so about November time. The initial plan, as set out by the Assistant Chief Constable when the new neighbourhood model rolled out, was that we would be at or near full establishment of our beat officers by the end of 2024. We won't be at, but we will certainly be near. So with another uplift of beat officers towards the end of the year, I'm keeping fingers and toes crossed, we'll be up into the 20s by that point. So it is a work in progress. What it means is that at the moment, your high earner wards, as I refer to them, so your Margate Centrals, your East Cliff, Cliftonville, etc., will have their own beat officer now. And in fact, Margate Central has 2, Cliftonville has 2, East Cliff Central has 2, and then the quieter wards, as the councillor referred to, some of our rural wards, Birchington, for example, again Nethercourt, as it's been raised up, will share a beat officer with other wards because they will have other responsibilities. So as time progresses, that will even itself out and improve it. In terms of our summer programme, we run an operation called Op Island within Kent Police. That is a very, very strong and bespoke operation that draws in county resources as well, including British Transport Police, South Eastern Enforcement Rail officers, dog handlers and other tactical operations officers as well. We get an uplift, a huge uplift of operational availability during that time to police our beaches and our busy areas. The plan is already pretty much in place for this year, which will commence June, July this year. And yes, to answer your question, this is a CSP plan. It was Kent Police written, but in partnership with the community safety team at Thanet District Council. So we will be doing this hand in hand with our partners. So and that would include the enforcement officers, the PSPO being very much part of that. Sorry, Penny, did you want to come in? Okay. So the enforcement officers are very, very much part of that plan. Now, the PSPO that I spoke about earlier, every single officer, once that's fully embedded, every single officer will know what that is, and they will have ticket books to be able to enforce against that. My instruction will be that you will enforce against that PSPO. The conversations I have with my council partners is that when Kent Police and the enforcement officers do enforce against it, that we really hit it home in order to send out the message that that sort of behaviour won't be tolerated. And yes, we have planned in our engagement plan already days of action around nuisance driving, drink driving, drug driving, and antisocial behaviour use of vehicles. They are planned into that schedule.
Can I just come in to say that there is a members' briefing on the 23rd, which will cover the beach and coast plan for the summer. So hopefully you'll be able to attend that, and Lisa will be there to talk about it. And also you're talking at cross purposes about PSPOs. The one that Councillor Manners is talking about is the beach PSPO. Oh, okay. The one you're talking about is the new one that we're going to bring in, which is for slightly different things.
Yeah, the new. I think we spoke earlier on. The new one is I've seen it. We've signed up to it. It is all ranging, it is powerful, and it will cover, as I alluded to earlier, it will cover a whole multitude of sins, quite frankly, and we will enforce.
And it will come through the process here.
Councillor Cowie.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Ian, for your presentation. And good to hear that crime levels in Thanet are down, particularly in my ward, Cliftonville West, which is, as we all know, is a fairly lively ward. And it's good to hear some of those figures are down. You would be pleased to hear that I was going to ask you about PSPOs and police staffing, which you've answered with Councillor Manners' question there. So really I wanted to ask you about the PSPOs. You need the staff to implement these PSPOs, as you well know. So really I was going to ask, are you happy with the numbers in police staffing in Thanet, and can these PSPOs, and you say they're being extended across the area, can they be implemented with the numbers that you have? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. In short, no, I'm not 100% happy with my numbers. I never will be, because I'm always looking for more people. But actually, in terms of our slice of the pie, as Kent Police, Thanet gets a really big slice of that pie. So we're not at the numbers I want to be yet. I'm hoping come the summer we'll be at better numbers. The PSPO strategy and enforcement is one piece of legislation that we've got. There's a whole raft of powers that we can use to deal with antisocial behaviour in all its forms. And the PSPO that will follow due process is part of that. But it is that enforcement strategy is at the forefront of how we plan to police this year. And when I say police, that's with a small p, because that's a partnership approach to dealing with the problems. For example, we've been really heavily sort of hamstrung, if you like, in the last year or two around the NOS canisters and the balloons, because the legislation from central government has not been strong in terms of how to deal with it. So we've been reliant on local PSPOs and lighter legislation to deal with that stuff. The new legislation around it is much stronger, and it will enable us to knock that on the head far better than we have previously, because it is a horrible thing to see. It does lead to other offending, and it does lead to an overall fear and perception of crime, which is something that's actually, you know, we talked earlier, Councillor, about how people feel about crime. That perception of crime is nearly as big as a blocker and an issue as the real numbers are, because unless we can convince people that we're a safe place to be, it doesn't matter what the figures say. So yes, I'm confident that come the summer and come the busier time, we will have, I would say, sufficient resources in order to tackle the issues. Do I want more? Of course, and I make myself unpopular with my headquarters by bidding for resources from our central hub regularly in order to come down and assist us down here.
Thank you. Keep bidding.
Councillor Wing.
Thank you, Ian. It is great to hear that the serious violent crime is going down. I do keep a look at the Central Harbour figures quite regularly, and they still remain quite shocking, but they're going in the right direction, which is really great. I sit on licensing, and this is my second term, so you start to get your feet under the table and understand it all a bit more. And I want to talk about enforcement of licences, of alcohol licences, because I want to talk about two aspects of enforcement. One is as they happen, possibly by the police, I think it would be your remit, and the second thing is after the event by TDC licensing. But before we can do that, you have to understand what that licence is about for that particular premises. And one of the things we have moved on is actually making sure that new licences, just like planning applications, comes toward councillors, because invariably it's in a local newspaper, it's not put on social media, nobody buys newspapers, very few people buy newspapers now, and it's put up in the establishment. So very rarely do actually residents find out that a premises is applying for a licence, a new licence, or there is an extended one that's gone up recently that I've found out from a resident not in my ward, but in East Cliff, the other side, on the same street that we share, which is again very worrying because it's going from 1 o'clock until 3 o'clock in an area where there's already a few. What I found out with one premises, and it was the evening that it was the morning of that serious knifing incident, and you're quite rightly, it's normally people who know each other, it's normally alcohol or drugs related, so I'm unlikely to be affected by that because I'm in bed. But what we then discovered is that the premises where the person came from should have put their tables and chairs away at 12 o'clock, and there should have been no outdoor drinking. Residents had footage of people drinking in the seating area still at 4 a.m. in the morning. And so first of all, there's a perception that if you've got an alcohol licence, that licence until 4 or 3 in the morning or 1 in the morning includes the whole premises. And actually what I discovered after asking our licensing team what exactly is that premises licence is there should have been no drinking outside of that premises. The doors should have been shut, the music should have been switched off, and they all should have been indoors. Now, so I think we've got a particular problem in a certain part of Ramsgate that isn't actually in my ward, but it's in Eastcliff and it impacts on our ward, so we have shared concerns, is that we're not enforcing the shutting, we're not making sure that those premises are actually abiding by the terms of their licensing agreement. If there are breaches, then obviously we have to ensure that our licensing team takes a strong view on those premises, and appropriate measures are taken to bring them in and slap them on the hands. And in my 5 years, we've had one such situation. It was a Margate business that was put through the ringer, and I think they've sorted themselves out. So that's my first issue. Is I don't see enough enforcement as things are happening, and I don't see enough post-enforcement when there are issues. What residents are being told is apparently the police tell the residents it's a TDC matter, and TDC tell the residents it's a police matter. So there's definitely got to be some working together to try and address those concerns, some very serious concerns that we share with the Eastcliff councillors about the way licences are being operated in our town. I also think we need to make more public. So if somebody's given a licence, then there needs to be, if somebody applies for a planning application, whether it's approved or not, I also sit on planning, I can go in and see what they wanted and see what they got. I don't seem to be able to do that with licences. There isn't a database where I can go in and, the Harbour Bar, I can go into the Harbour Bar and see what their licence is. I've had to check 2 licence agreements on my own street, although there are no problems on my street with the 3 businesses that have got alcohol licences. So that's the first thing I'd like to encourage. Better enforcement of licences at that time when there's a breach by the police. You shouldn't be drinking out here, your doors should be shut, everybody should be in, and then enforcement afterwards. So I don't know what you'd like to say about that. I'll go on to my next thing, which is the one thing that's missing from your sheet is graffiti. I have a pet hatred of graffiti because my entire ward is blighted by graffiti. I've reported graffiti on the main road going in on my ward. I reported it in October. I'm still trying to get that graffiti removed by a combination of RTC, TDC and KCC. Residents pay their money and they want the public realm to be clean and tidy. And it's a broken window scenario. If we can make the place look better, as you've said, then people are more likely to are less likely to commit crime. We can evidence that. A group of us have been looking after the shelters alongside the Ramsgate Society, and we completely repainted the ones on the Eastcliff, and Ramsgate Glass reglazed them for us. We've had no broken glass for months in those shelters. I'm touching wood that long may that continue. So we need to work on making sure the public realm, and we need to make sure we tackle the low-level crime that does affect us on a daily basis. I walked into town and I passed by, as does every resident in Ramsgate, masses and masses of graffiti, and we've got to start removing that, and we've got to start catching the culprits and making a meal of them. I also agree with the public consultation. I do think you do enough public consultation, but it very much feels as if we're being spoken to. And what I'd like to see is what can we do together. The recent litter picks tidied up the streets of Ramsgate massively, and that has a massive impact on our self-worth and our value and our love for our towns and cities, our towns and places. The refurbishment of the shelters is another thing that I think has had a positive impact on that area of Eastcliff, because it now looks welcoming and tidy. So it's how we can work together, residents, council and also the police, to try and help each other out with reducing crime. The other thing I'd like to ask is how does the police commissioner allocate police resources? There must be some sort of equation. Is it based on crime? Is it based on size of area? And is it something we need to take into consideration in the police commissioners' elections in May? Is it something we can do to send that message to the prospective police commissioners to help ensure that you get more resources?
I might have to ask you again. I'll kind of work backwards, if you like. So in terms of the PCC, obviously the PCC is responsible for the overall sort of allocation of funding, etc., for policing. Most of our policing allocation per person, if you like, is done as a tactical approach done by the police themselves. So we have lots of measures of how we do that, but we run a resource allocation model, and that is based upon crime, on vulnerability, on demographics, on population, on a harm index score that we use now. Cambridge Analytica provide us with a harm index score, which is how we identify those grip areas I was talking about, and it's very accurate. And it's proven to be accurate, because when we looked at our crime data, every time I mentioned, oh look, that's a grip zone, that's a grip zone, so it always falls into those. So a lot of our resource allocation is done via our local processes, and that's reviewed quite regularly. In terms of neighbourhood policing, the precept has just been, as you know, been increased by the PCC. That precept has been increased because of the uplift of neighbourhood policing. So we turned around to the PCC and said that we wanted to have all those beat officers, we wanted to improve our engagement strategy, we wanted to do everything that we've just set out in the plan, and the PCC has agreed with us. And hence why gone out to county and said, okay, the precept will increase in order to fund exactly that. So it is a listening stream, it does happen, and there is a strong reason why Medway and Thanet have the two largest police departments within the county. It's because they do listen, and we have a good method of doing it. I'll flit around again as I remember your things. In terms of licensing, I'll be perfectly candid with you. We have. You're right. There should be more enforcement around licensing. I have a licensing officer, works for central licensing, but she's responsible for enforcement of Thanet licensing issues. Where a problem, and it's about managing expectations, of course, because where there is an issue is that most of the licenses, for example, you referred about a timeliness issue. We're looking at 3 o'clock in the morning type of issue. My community safety team and my neighbourhood team won't be working at that time of night because I have to put them on duty when the key issues are for them. So what we'll be relying on is our frontline officers. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, my frontline response is reduced from where it is at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And we have to obviously prioritise what we're dealing with, because at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Friday and Saturday night, Thanet can be quite lively, and that's not just the nighttime economy, that's all sorts of demand that we have. But that said, I fully accept that I agree with you. It should be public knowledge what licences are. I agree with that. I mean, that's not a police remit or ability to get that done, but I'd be happy to put my 2 pennies into a licensing committee or TDC license, say, well, is there anything we can do together to promote that? And I'll give you an example. We've run a program, and I know I've spoken to many of you before about the program Best Bar None, which is a project that Thanet won an award for nationally. And it's an accreditation scheme for licensed premises in order to prove their safety, the way they look after the staff, the way they look after customers, and I've spoken about it many times, and I liken it to the food standards, hygiene stars that you get on restaurants and takeouts, and every licensed premises who signed up to it had to go through a training program, and they then had to be assessed independently to meet the standards of that process. Now, and just in the Ramsgate area alone, we had about 25 premises signed up to it. So that was really, really good. And Thanet won, and collaboratively Thanet won an award on how much that had improved the safety in the nighttime economy. The difficulty is with those schemes, like with anything else, it's a voluntary scheme. And I won't go naming names in this forum, but we could probably work out the licensed premises who went, no, we don't want to take part, and which presents us challenges. But I fully agree. There's more work to be done. I would suggest around our licensed premises to avoid having to get to that last point of calling hearings, etc., etc. But what I would say is that my licensing officer is pretty good And we've had a couple of incidents in Broadstairs recently with a couple of licensed premises where the activities of the door staff was called into question by members of the public, and we responded, and actually hearing reviews are being called for those premises. So, you know, there is some activity going on. I caught those two themes. Was there anything else out of those you wanted specifically?
I think some of it's the low-level stuff, which is the graffiti. It's what you said. We're unlikely to be impacted by the big crime, really. Pavement parking is another thing that really annoys me as well, because it blocks access for people with mobility issues, and it's a sort of pavement parking which isn't down to our enforcement team, it's a police matter. So that it's graffiti and that really silly pavement parking which is so bloody annoying, basically. Anyway, thank you officers for all they're doing.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, in terms of that, the graffiti issue, I don't disagree. I mean, signal crime is a major issue. You know, it's known as various things, the broken window syndrome, whatever you want to call it, that crime will lead to crime. You only need to look at like the old Laura Ashley building at Westwood Cross to show that once one window goes in, people see it as a green light to smash every other window. Similarly, if you put a graffiti tag on a wall in Ramsgate, people go, oh, that's a wall for graffiti, and it goes up. And it's something that, you know, I think as a partnership we need to discuss further. I know that there is quite a robust policy around removing anything that's inflammatory, racial, hate crime related, and that will be tackled very, very quickly. But the lower level stuff, for want of a better term, the stuff that just tends to get ignored, I'm absolutely in agreement. Yeah.
7 days is one, but Kerry's disappeared. Kerry spelt wrongly has disappeared.
I think we could add in bill posters as well. There seems to be an excessive amount of bill posters, which should be quite easy to tackle because the culprits are actually written on the nightclubs and pubs and whatever. Dreamland are probably one of the worst offenders. Councillor Bright.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to thank the Community Safety Partnership and Kent Police for the work you're doing with limited resources to deal with crime in Thanet. I think we're all agreed we could do with a lot more police on the streets. Sadly, Thanet still has the highest violence against women and girls and domestic abuse rates in Kent. Is the Community Safety Partnership able to build on the work they've already done with the Community Shield and My Night Out schemes and go even further by encouraging licensed establishments to take a more proactive approach to increasing women's safety, such as having a designated named champion for women's safety in each premises, trained to deal with the correct handling and reporting of inappropriate behaviour such as sexual harassment and assault? Is it possible to find out what percentage of licensed venues in Thanet have already signed up to the Community Shield and Ask Angela schemes? Surely every licensed venue should be a safe haven for women. So to ensure this, could we include a condition in licensing agreements that all licensed venues will adhere to women's safety principles such as signing up for Community Shield, Ask Angela and My Night Out? Also, will the next NEM be online, Neighbourhood Engagement Meeting be online? Facebook Live is very hard to engage with and ask questions. Can we go back to in-person meetings or try a more interactive online platform like Zoom or Teams? Thank you.
Thank you. I can't disagree with any of those any of those comments. Yeah, absolutely. The VORG strategy is forever developing. It's something that we are very, very passionate about for obvious reasons at the moment. Joanna Taylor, who couldn't be here this evening, her team, as part of the CSP, have really led on the Community Shield element that you were talking about, and My Night Out and the app and everything there. It would be sort of disingenuous of me to talk too much detail about, but absolutely, the work that they're doing around that is absolutely phenomenal, and I know for a fact that they're continuing to develop those. There's lots of very exciting projects coming out around that they're working on, and whereas Kent Police will lead on certain elements, that her team are leading on that sort of stuff. In terms of embedding into licensing agreements, that's not something I'm aware. I don't know is the answer, but we can certainly find out. I don't know what the legislation and the rules around it would dictate, or whether we can drop that sort of thing into a license agreement, but it's a good idea and it's something that we can certainly look at.
Yeah, sure. In London they have a women's nighttime safety charter, and apparently some councils have put that into licence agreements. So licensed establishments can make 7 pledges to kind of safeguard women. So maybe that is something that we can investigate. The other thing as well is just going into schools, speaking to young girls, speaking to women. I always talk about the Community Shield, My Night Out app, things like that. No one knows about it. And that's what I mean. We need to be getting that message out. These are really good schemes, but they're not good if people don't know that they exist. So I think we do need to get those businesses on board. We need to communicate that much more widely.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I don't disagree. I think, thank you for the feedback. What we'll do is we'll take that back to Joanna's team and have those discussions, especially around, as you say, those champions for violence against women and girls. I think that's a brilliant idea. So I can't see any reason why we wouldn't try and put that in place. But in terms of the engagement strategy, I know it keeps coming up. It is a moving feast. It is something that we're trying to improve. What was being referred to earlier is it's not an app. It's an online platform called My Community Voice. I don't know whether everyone's heard of it. If you haven't, please sign up to it and get when you're speaking to your communities, please get them to sign up to it. It's something that we're using more. We're not using it enough yet. The reason why we're not using it enough yet is because we don't have enough people signed up to it. It's only ever as strong as the amount of people that you have signed up to it. It is a method whereby your local beat officer can talk to you and can talk to the community and get, as you were saying, Councillor, about Nethercourt Ward, getting that information out there and saying, well, this is what you did. For those who've been around community policing for a long time, Kent Police used to run a system called You Said We Did. It's where the community would say, this is what we want, and then we fed back, we have done this, we did this. My Community Voice is far more sophisticated than that. It has the ability to be two-way engagement. It provides quick time updates of what the police are doing. It will promote things like the neighbour engagement events, etc. as we go forward. It is the favoured platform for Kent Police, and it will be here for some time. So if I can encourage you to, when you speak to your constituents and your community, to go to, just type in My Community Voice and it will come up, and then you register, you put in your details, and you can choose how much information you get, and we can tailor information based upon exactly that. But certainly all your comments around My Night Out, Community Shield, we'll take back and have those discussions. Thank you.
Okay, just take 2 more. Councillor Pope and Councillor Faruqi, and I think we'd wind it up.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Councillor Bright's actually already covered some of the things that I was going to ask, but I noticed in the report it mentioned about supporting programmes that reduce reoffending and sort of preventative measures. I was wondering if there were any programmes working with reoffenders and if they've been very successful, particularly in regards to violence against women and girls and sexual offences.
Yeah, there have, and we do it from a multitude of approaches in terms of how we do it. So there's an awful lot of work that goes on in schools, for example, to start with, so that's that preventative approach. We have a couple of things that are ongoing that will roll out within the next year that are really, really high level, that working on a national level as well. Kent Police have their own systems, obviously, of referral mechanisms that go into, and of course when someone is convicted of an offence of violence against women or girls, that can be part of the outcome for the offender. Again, the programmes that Joanna's team have run out are really, really, really strong around prevention, around tackling primarily offender males and preventing that reoffending from occurring. What I would say is that we do tend to try, from a partnership point of view, we try and focus on preventing it from happening at all, rather than the reoffending element, but it is something that's part of the programme and will continue to be. I'm really tempted to sort of go blurting out about all the exciting things we've got coming up, but I'd be shot if I did, so I'm not gonna do that. Yeah, don't worry, I won't. But there's some really great things over the horizon, and you know, and I think when you see them around violence on women and girls, it will have answered your question. So watch this space.
Councillor Faruqi.
thanks so much for such a detailed report and also for your commitment to going to the roots of all the issues. The question I have is about an area where we can't really go to the root of it. It's about the mental health issue. You advise that it could be something 60 to 70% of involvement of both victims and perpetrators of mental health. I'm an NHS doctor and I know how deeply underfunded mental health is in our area, so that's not something we can really go to the root of. So I wanted to ask what we can do to mitigate that with the resources and the wherewithal that we have. For example, have our officers being given, in knowing this is an issue, increased mental health training. I often see your colleagues in our A&E and QEQM, but I'm unsure how how best they are to deal with things when they actually arrive and, and bring the patients to the hospital and so on.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Yes, you're right. Training is massively vital, and it's improving all the time. There's an ongoing rolling training programme in terms of dealing with mental health, in terms of limiting the amount of Section 136 power that we use, because again, it's recognised that actually you can heavily put someone in crisis by just using that power. There's a programme that is rolling out in Kent, and it's started now, but it's rolling out over the next year, called Right Care, Right Person. I'm not sure whether you've heard of it, but it wasn't brought in by Kent Police. It was actually brought in by other forces and by the Care Quality Commission. And it's about recognising that most of the time when someone's in crisis, it'll be very often the police that are called and will turn up, and actually sometimes we make it worse, and that's not necessarily because we're trying to, but because they see the uniform, they see the authority figure, and things can get worse. So there is a programme that's been signed up by the health service, by the mental health teams, by Kent Police, by CCAM, South East Coast Ambulance Service, and the other agencies, in that there will be a proper what we call thrive process, so a risk assessment process that is undertaken at the first call as to who is the best agency to deal with that incident and how should we best deal with it. So in essence, it's about a multi-agency proactive approach to dealing with that person from the outset, as opposed to, quite frankly, the police go and scoop them up and then put them into a situation where every other agency is then under the pump trying to deal with it, for example, A&E. So this is something that was being trialled in northern counties really successfully, but it also works really well with young people, especially those going through mental health crisis, because we try and increase our trust and our rapport with young people, and all we do is end up fighting with them because we're trying to help them and then restrain them, so we're trying to get away from that. And that process includes every single mental health crisis call we go to. We now ring what we call 836, which is a phone number that the police officer rings at scene to get bespoke expert mental health advice there and then, so that the person on the other end of the phone will be a mental health professional who will either know the individual, is able to look up what the history is, and will better advise the officer as to who's going to deal with it. So this programme is brand new. It's only been going now for a month or so, and it's in its early days. But the Chief Constable is very, very strong on it, and in order to improve the service around mental health, because not only does it then improve the service for victims of mental health, it also improves the service for everyone else, because it will then free up Kent Police time to go and deal with other incidents. So that's something that we're rolling out.
Did you want to come back quickly, Councillor
I
Green?
just want to thank you. That's incredibly encouraging. And I'd heard about it being used in other areas. I wasn't aware that it was being rolled out here. So that is a very good answer. Thank you.
Councillor Green, did you have something quickly?
Yeah. I didn't want to finish this without mentioning domestic violence, because I think it's a huge issue, and I note that the stats have fallen slightly in Thanet, which surprises me given how long it takes to get these things to court and things. Ramsgate Town Council provides a safe space for people who are suffering domestic violence to get advice, which I guess is a long way from the end of it that you see. But I just wonder which part of the Community Safety Partnership should be concerned about providing that sort of advice to mainly women that need that sort of advice early on in the domestic violence pattern.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. What you're talking about, the advice centres, that they used to be attended by PCSOs as well. It used to be a joint thing, and they still continue in a slightly different way. But the charity that provides that is part of the partnership, so that they come to our CSP meetings, they come to our independent advisory group meetings as well. So that interagency link between the front end, i.e. us, and then the ongoing care for an individual, providing them that long-term support, safeguarding and advice, it is very much in place because the charity concerned are part of the CSP. So it's a vital service, absolute vital service that we support.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. I just want to pick up on one thing about your new beat officer and something that Mr. Ho said about, we have a great officer in Birchington, Steve England. You know, Steve's always accessible, comes to all our parish council meetings. He was at an annual parish assembly last week, gave a presentation all about statistics, ward statistics, and you know, I encourage everybody to get to know their beat officer because they are accessible, they're there, and especially in Birchington where we've got a lot of older people, it's good reassuring having that presence on the street, which we've never really had. Sort of PCOs, they're used to 9 to 5, but he's 7 days a week, he's around, and if I email him, he emails me back straight away. So, you know, and he's on first name terms with everyone. So it's good. Thanks. Okay, that leaves us all to note the report and to thank Penny and Mr. Hose. You want to come back quickly? Thank you, Mr. Hose. I hope they will take note of your comments and.
Another thing, I've got a breakdown of all the bits and pieces I've been trying to raise. I'll leave them at the back if anyone wants to pick up a copy of them. Feel free.
Okay, thank you for your time. So thanks to Ian Swallow and thanks to Penny for coming along this evening. And can we ask members to note the report? Okay, moving on. Item 5, Sport England Swimming Pool Support Fund, Ramsgate, Leisure Centre Solar, and I've been trying to practice this word all day, so I just say PV. And I call on Andrea to present the report.
Actually, Chair, I'm going to introduce the report initially, but obviously Andrea, the Head of Property, is here as well to answer any questions that councillors might have. And to reassure, I'm going to say PV as well through the report. So this report is concerned with Ramsgate Leisure Centre. And in particular a proposal to install solar PV at the leisure centre. And there's a lot of background in the paper. An annex to the paper is the already adopted net zero strategy and net zero action plan, which is really there to give you context for this project. The key thing about this report is, first of all, it's pre-decision scrutiny, and it's due to go to Cabinet next week on the 25th of April, with a recommendation to authorise the procurement of the works to install the PV installation at the leisure centre, along with some new pump devices, variable speed pumps, which reduce the amount of power used in the swimming pool installation. So the key things about the report, which I think you probably want, which I'll pull out for you. Firstly, budget. So the capital cost of the programme is estimated at 674,000, and there's decarbonisation surveyor working in the property team that has worked up the proposal and secured external funding from the Sport England Swimming Pool Support Fund to cover the cost of that work. The second key issue really is the financial implications, which I think are quite significant in the report. So you can see from the report that the current electricity bill at Ramsgate Leisure Centre is £19,000 per month, which it really highlights. It astounded me actually how much that is. It highlights the cost of running public swimming pools. The PV installation alone will save £7,300 a month from that cost. And then if you add on to that the savings related to the variable speed pumps and the savings related to a project that sits alongside this that your leisure are managing to install LED lighting in the leisure centre, the annual saving will be around 125,000 on the revenue cost of utilities, which is really quite significant. There's also a figure in there for the amount of carbon that's saved as a result of the project, 63 tonnes per year. I think it's probably worth putting that in the context of the council's overall carbon emissions from its controllable estate, which is also in the report, at just over 4,000 tonnes of carbon a year. So in terms of a contribution to the net zero strategy, it's only relatively small. However, I think it does highlight the huge task of reaching net zero across the council's estate, and I think it's clearly it's going to be a case of small steps along the way to reduce carbon emissions wherever we can. I think the final key thing is about procurement, and that paragraph 2.4 at the end of the cover report sets out the proposed procurement strategy, which is proposed use of the laser framework that is a compliant route to market that would allow us to call off the services we need to deliver this contract. So I think that's probably all by way of introduction, but obviously if councillors have got any questions, then either myself or Andrea will be able to answer them, I'm sure.
Thanks, Bob. Members, I've got Councillor Davis.
I'd just like to say how welcome it is, Bob. That's a phenomenal saving, nearly 40%. The sooner it's done, the better, clearly, because budgets are pressed all round. The only thing I will make an observation is I think we should be insisting on any building in Thanet, residential or commercial, has to, when it's built or upgraded, should have solar on it anyway, because if that's the amount of impact that solar can make. Now, obviously, it's more dynamic because of the volume of electricity that a pool uses. But even if it was half that and made a 20% reduction, that would be such a step towards our net zero commitment. I think whatever we can do to recommend that planning becomes a planning condition, building regulation, let's do it, because that is phenomenal. Thank you, and well done. Whoever's acquired this, well done to all, because it's significant.
Councillor Wing.
Oh, I'd just like to say thank you as well, because I think this is a project that's dealing with the small end of the big problem, and we always seem to be what we may be possibly going to see in Minster Marshes is an upgrading of the system to increase consumption, and what we actually need to do is reduce consumption. We need to tackle the small end of the problem, which actually means savings for the owner of the building, and also savings of carbon. But of course the big energy companies don't want us to have free electricity, do they, or cheaper electricity? So I'd just like to congratulate you, and I'd just like to say that I obviously won't be here in 2080. Summers are likely to be 5 and 6 degree warmer, so I think we can safely say that the swimming pool is likely to be underwater anyway. But anyway, thank you.
Councillor Manners.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the
the presentation there. Do we know if the roof at Hartsdown is robust enough to support the weight of these panels, given the previous history of the roof there? Was just something, I don't know if that's been looked at already. The other thing is, I thought it was Hartsdown as well. Oh, it's just Ramsgate. My apologies. The other question was, I understand from people that build solar farms that they're always on the lookout for large tracts of land where they can install these facilities and come to an arrangement with the landowner. Has TDC looked at that possibility with regard to this to offset the costs of running the swimming pools?
The first question I think is about Hartsdown. So obviously this is Ramsgate, and to reassure you, obviously all the necessary professional services involved in the design and delivery of the scheme are included in this proposal. So anything that in terms of structure of the building, all that will be part of that process. I don't think we've specifically looked at our land holdings in terms of large-scale solar PV. I think probably the scope for that is relatively limited. But you're right, there are landowners around that are proposing exactly that. There are other ways to offset carbon, but it's quite clear from the work that has been done on our net zero strategy that we won't get to net zero unless we do some carbon offsetting of some sort. So I think as we progress through the delivery of that strategy, we'll have to look at all of those options to see what is potentially available for offsetting. But to answer your question now, I don't think we've specifically looked at that in any detail at this stage.
Councillor Pope.
Thanks. Are there plans to do this at Hartsdown as well?
Our initial application to the Swimming Pool Support Fund has been for Hartsdown as well. Unfortunately, due to the sort of 4 times over demand to the £40 million the Exchequer has put towards this, Hartsdown was not one of the successful applicants. There were a total of 726 applications put forward. So we were extremely lucky to be able to secure this for Ramsgate, but unfortunately Hartsdown did not quite meet the Exchequer's conditions.
Anybody else?
It's probably worth adding to that. Sorry, that obviously this is a round of funding bids that we've been successful in. If there are other opportunities to secure funding, then obviously we would go for those as well. We do have a couple of posts in our staffing structure that are specifically about this activity. So there's a climate change officer post in the in Hannah's service. I'm just trying to... Thank you. Transformation service. That is obviously focused on the delivery of the net zero strategy. But then there's also a decarbonisation surveyor in the property team that's worked on this project. So those roles are there specifically to help us on this journey, which is going to take some, over a number of years to decarbonise our estate. So yeah, when there's another opportunity to bid for further buildings, then we will.
Mr. Blundell would like to come in at this point.
Thank you, Chair. It's just been brought to my attention actually that there some of the financial implications, the financial and value for money implications that are in the report that you can see don't reflect some of the financial and value for money implications that we've included in the Cabinet report that's been drafted and is going to be published in a day or so's time. Doesn't affect the actual numbers that you're looking at, but there's just some additional information that I want to bring to your attention because effectively it will be published in a day or so's time. So within the Cabinet report itself, it will set out around the sharing arrangements that are and will be in place in terms of recognising the savings that are being generated from the scheme. So I need to give credit to Mr. Sanham, Head of Finance, who is working on this in conjunction with the legal team to renew and refresh the lease and management arrangements in place. That, when that's agreed, and it should be relatively shortly, that allows for a proportionate distribution of the savings that are presented in the report. A third will be allocated to Your Leisure for a reinvestment. A third will be allocated into a fund to be allocated by TDC ourselves towards Your Leisure activity, and the remaining third will be distributed directly back to TDC. So that just gives you a little bit more clarity in terms of the savings that are presented in the report, how they're going to be shared between the partners that are involved in the scheme. So, anything else that you wanted to add to that, Max? I appreciate you drafted those and they're your words.
No, that's it. It covers everything. Yeah,
thank you.
Cheers.
Do members have anything to say? No, I think just congratulate everyone and thank everyone who worked on that report, because it's, I'm sure we all agree it's a worthwhile thing. So do we all note the report? Any recommendations you want to send off to Cabinet?
More of it.
More of it. That's it. I'm sure we'd all recommend that. So,
You mentioned about the
Hartsdale.
Well, no, PV. You mentioned about the PV on new builds.
Oh yes.
Oh yes, yeah, if we could make a recommendation that maybe consideration could be given as a planning condition that all new build in the Thanet area, firstly I would make it wider, but we only affect Thanet, but for the Thanet area, it's a requirement that solar provision is included wherever possible. Sorry, and yeah, but specifically because we're, and again, not to be argumentative, but because we're on this PV, solar PV, that financial example of the potential impact in terms of not just cost, but volume of consumption as well, would make a heck of a difference, if, particularly given the deluge of unnecessary development that's going on. I think we should be absolutely demanding.
Yeah. If I could ask Bob, do you know if there's any plans to increase the code in to make solar panels a condition?
Yeah, well, I think what I'd say to that, I mean, obviously I will take those comments back to the planning officers to ensure that they are aware of that. But we are part way through a review of the local plan, and the council's established a local plan cabinet advisory group to look at local plan policies. And that brief includes any design codes that we can incorporate into the local plan. So it would be an appropriate place for that group to talk about the sorts of features that we might want to include in the local design code, and those two suggestions can be referred to that group for consideration, I think.
Thanks for that, Bob. My only concern that I'd like to express on that is time frame, in that the local plan review seems to be dragging on forever and a day. No disrespect to anybody responsible for it, but it is. We say that we're waiting for government. Government say that the authorities need to get on with it. However, if we're another year or so off that, that's an awful lot of development potentially going on that could have, and I think should have, solar provision designed in. So if I can just implore that, to move forward with looking at that as quickly as possible, I think it could make quite a drastic difference to the island's power consumption. So.
Okay. So if all members agree, I will get that recommendation added to this report that this council looks to have solar panels on all new builds in Thanet in the future. Okay.
Wherever physically possible.
Physically possible. Practically possible. Yeah, practically possible. Everybody happy with it? I presume we are, yeah. Got that? So the council, sorry? Oh, so you're proposing, anybody want to second that? Councillor Austin second that. Okay. Excellent. So let's move on. Item number 6 is the purchase of Section 106 affordable housing units. I'll call on Bob again to introduce the report.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this report is the latest in a series of reports that have come here and then on to Cabinet as part of the Council's commitment to deliver 400 homes over a 4-year period. And part of that strategy was the acquisition of properties from developers that were subject to a Section 106 agreement and required to be delivered as affordable homes. This acquisition will bring the total that we've delivered since that strategy to, when I say delivered, I mean negotiated and agreed with developers, to nearly 200, which I think, considering it's been about 12 months since we implemented that strategy, is a really good start to that programme. Each project that we brought forward has come here and has gone on to Cabinet, and each project has had financial modelling completed for the specific units that we're proposing to purchase, and this project in Nash Road has had that done as well, and the outcome of that financial modelling is in the report. Nearly all of them, there's been a couple of exceptions, but nearly all of the projects have shown a deficit in the first year, when, effectively when looking at the implications of the interest on borrowing, the cost of managing and maintaining homes against the rent stream. So with the exception of a couple of schemes, they've all showed deficits in the first year, but all moved into surplus somewhere between year 10 and year 20. We've projected the business plans forward to over a 50-year horizon, and all of them over that period generate surpluses that come back to the council's housing revenue account. And in that way, effectively, this becomes a self-sustaining programme. Over time, the new homes generate surpluses that can then be reinvested. To cover the deficits in the initial years, the council approved the set-aside of £300,000 revenue pot that we've used to cover those deficits, and we have been tracking with colleagues in finance how we've been, the extent to which we've committed against that 300,000, and we're able to continue to deliver the programme. Just a couple of other things. We are planning an all-member briefing about the progress that we've made. So obviously you see these reports in isolation, they're about specific schemes, but we are planning a briefing for May to give an update on how we're delivering across the whole programme, both the acquisitions and the new build programme. And the Housing CAG will also have an update report in its August meeting against the whole programme. So there we are. So this report is going to Cabinet next week, and Overview and Scrutiny are invited to make any comments.
Thanks, Bob. Councillor Moore.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The last proposition, we had a proposal and seconded, but did we all agree unanimously? Because I didn't see us all vote on that. That was my first point. Yeah, and the next point would be, regarding our new housing, are we going to be looking at putting PVs on those as well? And if so, how are we going to fund it?
The new build element of the programme has PVs on them, yes. The acquisitions really depend on what the individual developers have, designed and what they've secured planning consent for. And so we're in less control of the design detail of stuff we're buying through the acquisitions programme, but where we're constructing them ourselves, and there's four sites in the next phase of construction, those homes will have PV.
Councillor Manners.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Bob. Could you please just clarify how we get to the figure of 574 250 for legal and stamp duty? I'd have assumed stamp duty was 3%. I don't know how it works with local authorities on each individual property, which gives a figure of about 137,000 for stamp duty. So I just wondered how we had where the rest of the money was going.
I don't know if I can give you a detailed breakdown of that now, but I can get that for you. So obviously that calculation was done by colleagues in finance. What I can say is that in the spring budget, the government changed the regulations in relation to stamp duty land tax. We were previously beneficiaries of discounts for bulk purchases. So in the previous reports that you've seen, the figures for associated costs were lower than these, but that was a direct result of the government changing the rules about stamp duty land tax. Obviously we've modelled in here the cost based on what was announced in the recent budget.
Mr. Blundell, I think can offer some information.
Thank you. Yeah, as Mr. Porter's already said, there were some changes to the rates that are applied. So previously we could apply 3% to each individual unit. Now the thresholds are aggregated together. So if you're looking at anything above 1.5 million, there's a 15% rate that's applied, which brings us to £416,000 just on stamp duty. We're looking at all options that we can sort of explore, while also making sure that we fairly pay the tax that we are obliged to do in accordance with the council's fair tax motion as well. But it's a bit, it is, we obviously want to make sure that we are complying with our obligations, but this is something where it looks like government policy isn't quite joined up. So I think what we need to be doing is lobbying government to look at this, because it is putting financial pressure on local authorities from a house building perspective. So,
Councillor Davis.
Again, I'd just like to say how welcome it is that we're making this provision. Sorry, how much I welcome the provision, because mistakes have been made over the years. So we're not to be political about this, but particularly in communities like this with our economics, there is a need for the social market to be supported. I'd like to express a concern about the pace, because we are borrowing money to do this, and we're borrowing at a time where, even with preferential deals, it's the most expensive time for the last 5 or 6 years at least to have borrowed any money. We set a 4-year objective to purchase 400, and we're halfway through it, 1 year in, at the most expensive time of doing it. Some of the properties that have been purchased, the spades aren't even in the ground yet, and that's what really concerns me, is that we're getting very excited about this, and yes, it will solve problems, but it's not going to do it for a while. In the meantime, we have the very welcome acquisition of Truro Road as temporary accommodation. But whilst we're being very focused on looking after developers who conveniently can't find anyone to fulfil their 106, maybe we need to look at better diligence in planning, so that if you cannot complete your 106 obligations as a developer, this business of coming back and saying it's no longer economic needs to be dealt with. They either produce the 106 or don't. I do believe that we should be building more ourselves, but again, if we can do it on a comparable cost per square metre. However, I'm concerned that we're so focused on these housing units, some of which won't be around for at least 12 months, that perhaps we need to be a little more focused on temporary and interim accommodation, getting out of the grip of organisations like Paramount, and actually saving a fortune, because the money that's paid for interim accommodation is about 4 or 5 times the local housing allowance. Yeah, if we can provide our own temporary accommodation, that must be more cost effective. And this week alone, there have been people in need. The temporary accommodation they had to be, okay, it's no individual officer's fault. County Durham, 7.5 hours away, and this is breaking that would break the family unit locally. That's just one example. For us to be offering people temporary accommodation on the Scottish border is frankly farcical. And I think that we need to look at our priorities and whether we're going to start throwing money at developers to start building in a year's time, or whether if we're going to accelerate some expenditure, let's accelerate getting the temporary accommodation into place and protect the people that we represent. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to come back?
Well, there's quite a lot in there. No, it's fine. I don't think that there's a range of options available to the council and a range of funding sources here, and I don't think it's an either-or scenario. We want to pursue all of these options. So, you know, the construction of our own homes using our own programme on land that we either already own or have acquired, which we are doing, the delivery of this programme, as well as the temporary accommodation programme. And as you probably know, the council's agreed a £2.5 million annual capital budget for the acquisition or construction of more temporary accommodation. We are struggling at the moment with making the temporary accommodation programme financially viable, largely because of restrictions on the level of housing benefit that people can get in temporary accommodation. Is really putting some pressure on that. With myself, with colleagues from Housing and Finance, are going to be getting our heads together to try and find a solution to that, to see if we can actually make that programme work so we can bring forward more projects like Truro Road. That project itself, you know, I think was a particularly good, financially stacked up really well, and because it was a hotel and we're converting it to residential, you know, the values worked out particularly well for that project. So we're really keen to bring that one forward and get it occupied. It's probably worth saying that our own construction programme is more expensive than this acquisitions programme. Per square metre, we're spending more in our own construction programme. There's lots of reasons why building our own homes is a good idea, partly because we can design them to our own design standards. We can include the sorts of things that you want to see included, like solar PV, which we are including. But it does need to be recognised that it's more expensive per square metre. And if the programme was solely on our construction, we would be doing less because of the cost. A comment about the relationship with Section 106 agreements and whether developers are fulfilling their obligations. So probably the key thing here is the value that we're purchasing homes at. The strategy that came to full council said that we should be looking to secure around about 40% subsidy from the market value to make these projects work. And generally our offers have been somewhere around about 60%, so a 40% discount on an open market sale value. So, you know, categorically the developers are fulfilling their obligations to deliver affordable housing by selling units to us. The other thing I think to say is that the borrowing that is proposed to support these projects will only be drawn down when it's needed. So if, like Nash Road, you know, construction hasn't started yet and they might not be finished for another 18 months or so, or, you know, we won't be taking ownership of them until then, and we won't be drawing down the funding until that point. So, you know, I completely recognise that we've been in quite a high interest rate environment, but that is reducing, and at the point where we actually take some of these properties and draw down the borrowing, you know, the rates might be more preferential.
We'll borrow at the rate for
exactly, yeah.
Councillor Wing.
I'm glad we're bringing more houses on. I think it's a good idea. I just want to ask, will we be providing deposits up front, and what happens if the company goes bust? Because we are seeing that quite a few developers are not able to fulfil their commitments. And the other thing I want to ask is, as the purchaser, will we still have rights to the 10-year build guarantee on new builds, and also issues to do with snagging, which always occur in new builds 12 months, 18 months after them? And will the quality of the build be to the same quality as the other properties on the overall estate or overall development?
Sorry, could you repeat the first part? Sorry.
Will we be required to hand over a large deposit to secure these buildings, or, as you've just said, we won't have to part with any money until the buildings come live? If we do have to provide a deposit, what securities have we got if the developer doesn't fulfil their commitment to build?
Yeah. So there's two forms of agreement that we could use that are quite common in the industry and that housing associations generally use. One is known as turnkey agreement, which effectively it's like buying a house when it's completed. And the second one is a development agreement, which effectively you're in contract much earlier with a development agreement. What we've done so far have been turnkey agreements, which means that we don't have to pay significant deposits in advance, but the development agreements do allow for stage payments earlier in the process, and there are some advantages for that, based on having more control over the quality of what's delivered, but also being in agreement earlier in the process. Whereas a development agreement, then any payments would be based on valuations of actually completed work. So you wouldn't be paying for something that wasn't or hadn't already been constructed.
My other questions were about, as a purchaser, we still have access to that 10-year new build guarantee,
yes,
and also to any snagging issues that might arise 12 months or 18 months after the new builds are occupied.
Yeah, and we do undertake a snagging process and ensure that those issues get dealt with.
Councillor Whitehead, unfortunately, you're not a member of the committee, and I've had further training in the last couple of weeks. I've always been a bit free and easy letting people speak, but I did ask you if you wanted to speak under 20.1, which you're supposed to do before the debate. Unfortunately, you can't come in. Sadly, just the rules of debate and the Constitution and the terms of reference, unfortunately. Any further questions from members? Okay, so we're asked to note the report and make any recommendations to Cabinet. Are there any recommendations? Councillor Manners?
Thanks. Just to follow up on what Chris said, to explore ways of minimising the stamp duty costs.
So you're proposing that? Does anybody want to second that? Yeah. Councillor will second that, and does everyone agree that we put that as a recommendation? We all agree. Okay, excellent. So, okay, moving on to item 7, the Tourism Review Working Party Report. I'll call on Councillor Britcher to introduce his report.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, we've been working on this tourism report since, I believe, September. So first of all, I'd just like to thank Charles, and I'd like to thank my other committee members. So that's Councillor Austin, Councillor Green, Councillor Packman and Councillor Cupp. I'd also like to thank the other officers who engaged with us, and also the members who attended the, I suppose you call it the open meeting, in which other councillors who weren't on the committee were able to have their inputs. So we've got 5 main recommendations, which are shown at we've got a digest at the beginning of the report. To improve beach management in peak season through a variety of measures, some of which have already been trialled. Secondly, to improve the provision of public toilets, particularly those most used by visitors. Next, to work to maintain cleanliness, manage waste effectively, improve the recycling rates, and minimise the costs of managing additional waste at peak periods, and that does include having an extra look at short-term lets. To proactively manage traffic and parking issues. And finally, to maximise income from the visitor economy. So yes, I hope everyone's been able to have a look into the report. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Britcher. Yeah, excellent report, very well put together, and commendation to all the members, and especially Councillor Austin, who helped you put it together. I think it's another great report, and as everyone who was at full council last time, I did say to the leader that I hope he takes these reports seriously and takes the recommendations seriously, and let's see some action on it. And you know, there's been some comments from officers, not on the financial management, because I think trying to maximise income from tourism, I think, is where we should be looking. So I know there's been a lot of things in the media recently about tourism tax and Airbnbs and et cetera, et cetera. So do members have any questions or comments they'd like to make? Councillor Manners.
Thanks, Chair. Just thanks for the report, and it's really good to see that we're looking at how the tourist economy can actually benefit Thanet. My question was whether something could be included on private provision of public toilets where it's a TDC-owned asset. There's one particular cafe in Cliftonville East, for example, that doesn't allow the public to use its toilets, but it has toilets on site, and yet TDC are paying for Portaloo provision just 50 metres away. And when leases are coming up for renegotiation or renewal, that public access to toilets where they exist on site, or it's possible to install toilets readily on the site, that could be looked at as part of the lease renewal. That would go some way to taking the pressure off of the public toilets that we've got ourselves and putting the pressure on the private sector to actually deliver some of that provision.
Thank you. Councillor Austin.
There is a recommendation that we explore working with hospitality venues and so on to look at that. It doesn't specifically look at leases and property that belongs to us, but we could add a recommendation to that effect if members of this committee want to add that for Cabinet's notice. But there is a suggestion that, as well as proceeding with our existing public toilet refurbishment programme, we also talk to hospitality venues.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a stick and a carrot there. We can obviously ask private property owners to work, to provide public toilets. But where TDC actually owns the asset and has control over it, when a lease is being renewed, then maybe that is obviously an opportunity to increase toilet provision for visitors in Thanet. So
Sure.
yes, if that can be included, please do so.
I was just going to say, if there's an individual issue with an individual leaseholder, to say ask Andrea, but she's. I just looked and she's gone. But maybe that should be something you should email Andrea on the first instance to find out why that lease has not been.
It's possibly not included in the.
Any further, Councillor Davis?
I think it's an important initiative, and it's been we've gone down this route a little bit as a council previously. I think we have to be aware also that in order to expect businesses to supplement the offering, it's important that we maximise our offering ourselves within, obviously, the resources available. An example of how wrong this can go is, and many don't even know that it's there, but Waitrose in Ramsgate, for example, have a public toilet which is having to be cleaned 3 or 4 times a day. It's getting better because I believe we've reopened Cavendish Street, but all those responsible for the antisocial behaviour and all the basically bench junkies that were sitting outside Cavendish Street and were locked out of there have been taking it in the last year or two to find their way to Waitrose, I've discovered. And members of staff at Waitrose are having to clean the walls and things after these individuals have been in there. Now, that's just one example, but I do know of other businesses that have had a problem with this. So I think in order for us to expect them to contribute resource, it's only fair that we continue down this important route of getting our toilets back open. I was watching Politics South East at the weekend. Adair Council, Brighton, Hastings, they're all years behind the loop and shutting toilets, which, whether or not it's a statutory provision, for God's sake, let's respect the public. So anything we can do, and I welcome the recommendations to develop that, and I think it then gives us the moral ground to go and ask businesses to support us. But it should be done as an adjunct, not as an alternative.
So if we all look at the report, 3.2 public toilets. There was investigating possibilities of collaborating with hospitality businesses to offer toilet facilities to visitors when public toilets are closed. So it is in there.
Oh no, I think we're already there.
Yeah,
I
well,
just want to reinforce
there.
that and just make people aware of some of the unintended consequences of trying to move the antisocial behaviour, a bit like when we put parking restrictions on the seafront, all it's done is clogged it up 100 yards away. The other thing I'd like to welcome as well, despite being a representative of the party of low taxation, is punitive costs, where last week it was announced 866 Airbnbs for rent in Ramsgate and 21 flats. That's obscene. And that's why we've got people being sent for temporary accommodation to the other end of the country. We can't cope with the number of people on the housing list. Personally, I'd make it a lot more than double, because it's absolutely obscene, the number of people, and I think what should happen is for it to qualify as Airbnb, the owner should be resident. If they're not, then it's then it's simply a commercial investment and should be taxed accordingly. So again, thank you to the committee and the report for highlighting this, because it's a really serious issue.
Yeah, I think we all agree Airbnbs I mean, although they're wanted and they're necessary for our tourists and for our visitors, I think the Airbnb, but I was just going to come to this, Airbnb, I think where it started out was renting your garage, your converted garage or your spare room. I think it's now gone to the opposite extreme, where people are using it as a business and buying and building properties just for Airbnb. I think this needs regulation.
In my own square, well, my own square, but the square where I live, 3 properties which accommodated families in the local economy who spent in the shops and contributed to local life are now voids half the time, and obscene money being charged for long weekends and things, and the owners are laughing about it and openly discussing it when they deign to visit just to check, where their riches are coming from. This is not fair on this community, and until we get adequate regeneration, the jobs that would be available from the regeneration projects, and I'm not going to get political and name them all, but we know what we're talking about, and until people can earn a proper living on this island and not be on the gig economy wages, then we need to do something about these scavengers and locusts, which is all they are on our economy, and the community need to be respected and given decent accommodation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis.
Rant over.
Councillor Wing.
Yeah, thank you for all the hard work that people have put in. It really is quite a detailed report. And in the last 7 days, I have used 2 of our public toilets. The one by the main sands and also the lookout toilet is quite adequate. There's always toilet paper in there. They're reasonably clean. Yeah, they could do with modernising and upgrading a bit. But again, there's another issue here about how we work together. People won't be aware, but I'm part of a gardening group that gardens around the Screaming Alley toilets. We've looked after those gardens for the last 7 years, and I think that also helps with the overall care and not so much abuse in those toilets there. So again, it's how we can maximise working with residential groups and volunteer groups that are already out there doing stuff. Maybe the one thing that's missing from this report is the impact of events on our areas, and maybe that's got to be a separate unit, a separate discussion altogether. You look at Broadstairs and you look at Sandwich, there almost seems to be an event going on every weekend in Sandwich. For other towns, at Ramsgate Town, we know we've got some event organisers that have just dropped by the wayside because it's become so problematic and so expensive to actually run events. And yet these events actually bring tourism into our towns, and those people spend money in our businesses, and our businesses are struggling at the moment. Our high streets are struggling. So maybe that's the only admission from this report, but I really do think it's a really useful report, and I hope the Leader of the Council takes this seriously.
Councillor Austin.
There is something about events. It's not in detail, but it does talk about community events, and it comes into the finance section about looking at events on the basis of which are run by large external bodies and which are run by local community groups. And we know this from our experience. Many of us on the group were people who've been involved with parish or town councils, where we end up funding the community groups in order for them to pay the events fees to Thanet District Council, which seems a rather stupid way of going about it. So we have highlighted it, but we haven't gone into detail because we felt that was almost a separate topic that needed a bit more attention itself.
Yeah, I remember the discussion we was going to look into why these events don't take part any longer, and dig down into it. Yeah.
Links into the previous report on working more closely with
Yeah,
councils
yeah,
as well.
sure. And your next.
And the
next one. Councillor.
I've just back onto the conveniences. I just wanted to comment that if we roll that policy out, we could really make a splash.
Councillor Manners.
Yeah, great. Thanks. The point on Airbnbs, it's not just Airbnbs. I mean, that's just one of the many booking platforms that exist for short-term holiday accommodation. So, you know, you're going to play whack-a-mole if you go after any specific, you know, there's Booking.com, Expedia, hotels. There's a whole plethora of those companies. But I understood. Am I right in believing that it's now you can now charge a 200% premium for second homes and holiday lets? That was allowed through for council tax, because there is a bit of a problem with business if you treat them as businesses, because they get a zero rate exemption. So they pay, and I know this myself from my own experience of paying I was expecting huge council tax bills for properties in Cheltenham a few years ago, and I was astonished to discover that we were exempt. It's a ridiculous central government idea that you've got large properties very often that are paying zero council tax if they're registered as businesses. So it's something to watch out for there. And I'd come back to the point, the recommendation that we do have a recommendation on the public toilets with TDC property assets.
Okay, I'm not sure if Matt wants to come in. I know there's obviously the business rate relief on a small business that they get if they class it at the Airbnb, but I'm not sure about this 200% on second home.
So effectively it becomes really complicated, because if they're living in there a proportion of the year, then they're not going to get charged for it being the 200% premium is what it effectively works out. So this has been looked at a number of times, and effectively properties like Airbnb and the others effectively fall through the cracks a little bit with regards to what you can and can't charge them. It becomes incredibly complicated. It depends on how long they're there, how often it's let out, and various other different things. And the same is the implication in relation to business rates. You then get into the situation about is it commercial waste or is it residential waste, because we're also collecting the bins. You can't charge all those additional costs effectively. So.
Complicated system. Anybody else want to make any comments? Okay, so we're happy to send that off to Cabinet. I think it's some quite wide-ranging, broad-ranging recommendations there that we need to hold Cabinet feet to the fire when we set these recommendations, this and previous reports. Okay, all happy to send that off with no recommendations?
Can we have a recommendation on toilet provision in TDC assets, where TDC actually owns the property and lives for lives?
Okay, so we've got the one where we're investigating possibility of collaborating with hospitality businesses. Do you want to change the word in there to include
in addition to that, where
TDC
owns the asset on new leases or renewals of existing leases to negotiate that the lessee provides toilets where they're already in situ in the building?
Do you want to do a separate bullet point? Are we happy with what it is? Do we want to make that recommendation? Or are we happy with the way it's worded as it comes?
I'd suggest that we say that we would like Cabinet to consider the possibility of looking at our own properties in particular for this. I wouldn't want, I'm not sure in the spirit of the discussions that we had at the working group, we would want to recommend a specific line that TDC should take, but maybe just to raise Councillor Manners' point as, I don't know what other members think.
I'll ask Councillor Bishop what he wants to do.
Well, yeah, obviously it does link in with a point we've already got, although you know, I wouldn't be opposed to saying at least consider it, as Councillor Austin said, to actually look at how feasible it is.
I'm talking about properties that TDC owns, so they're essentially TDC owns toilets along in high visitor areas, and that those properties that we look at insisting that the operator makes them available to the public. The toilets belong to TDC, and it's simply a case of making it clear in the lease that that's one of the provisions of the lease that the public can access them. Where on lease renewals or on new leases on TDC owned property, where existing toilet provision exists, it be made available to the public during normal business hours and looked after, the maintenance and cleaning dealt with by the lessee of the property itself.
Is this a widespread issue? Is it just one or two that we're looking at?
Well, it's one that it's very obvious for one property in Cliftonville East. I'm not sure how widespread that is elsewhere on the Isle. We're paying for public toilets 50 metres away.
I think it's right that we should ask Cabinet to consider it.
Yeah.
Because it will make the leases less attractive. So there's a balance here.
Yeah.
So they need to consider
it. For context, I think we're already there, because the Western Undercliff, before Southern Water flooded it with sewage, the cafe, part of the lease arrangement with them, which is why they had a longer lease arrangement, was that they maintained the toilets during their trading hours and opened and closed them. I believe that's the arrangement at Cliff's End on Hughing Green, where you've got the Viking Cafe there, and there's one of our toilet blocks behind it. And again, I think, and George the Sixth Park, yeah. Is George the Sixth not? As I say, I'd have to check the current arrangements, but I believe that's the case. So what I'm saying is the mechanism for incorporating that into the lease is clearly there, because the precedent has been there for a good decade anyway. Maybe it just needs to be incorporated on a more sort of standard basis.
Okay, so on renewing leases on properties that are owned by TDC, any toilets attached are made available to the public. Is that what is that considered?
It needs to be a consideration, because if you look at Vincent's on Spencer Square, they have one toilet. And if they're suddenly swamped by the public using their one toilet, they're going to end up with toilet issues. So I think it needs to be a consideration of the examples we've given are where there was a couple of toilets outside. So that's certainly... so I think it definitely needs to be considered. I do know that Vincent do allow the public to go in and use their toilet, but I think if that was, could be a problem.
Okay, so you're proposing it. Anybody seconding it? You're seconding it. Everybody agree with that, to add that in?
With the word consider.
With consideration at the end, yeah. Yep. So, Councillor Moore, did you want to...
Yes, Chair. The only problem I have with what's being suggested is if someone leases a business and it's a paying business that has customers that frequent, therefore they have a toilet, and those customers are buying, so they're paying and they're subsidising people using that toilet. If you then allow members of the public just to go in willy-nilly, they're not buying anything from that business. That business is then supporting. Are you then saying that the council subsidises that lease to accommodate the water rates, toiletries, soap? I mean, that's where I see it, where I struggle with it. So that's my point.
Yeah, can I come back on that? Because the case I'm talking about is they have toilet provision on site. They just refuse to operate it because TDC runs along and opens some portaloos for their customers 50 metres away. That's the issue. Obviously, it's at the discretion of the business whether they allow non-customers to use their toilets. That's common business practice. You know, in practice, if you get caught short when you're shopping in Margate, you pop into Starbucks or Costa. You don't necessarily go to the local public toilets. But where we have TDC assets which have toilet provision, that toilet provision should be open. Whether, you know, I think that you have to leave it to the officer's discretion whether they insist it's available to the general public or just to customers. But having TDC assets with toilets on site which are closed off, so and forcing TDC to pay with taxpayers' money to have alternative toilet provision strikes me as being ridiculous.
Councillor Austin.
I think what we said about consider covers all of this, but could I just add to Councillor Moore's point, having just signed Ramsgate up for the refill scheme where hospitality venues let people go in and fill their water bottles for free. Refills research across the country shows that the average customer who is allowed to go and fill their water bottle actually ends up spending about £5 in the venue.
So we're happy to add that recommendation and that, yeah, as a considered recommendation. Okay, everybody's nodding their head.
I think we need to perhaps just put in something that differentiates. You know, you can have a small food premises or whatever customer services premises that's got a staff toilet that's not accessible and not really suitable for public use. What we're really referring to here is where there's toilets designed for public use, whether they're a public convenience or a shop floor toilet that's readily accessible to anybody that walks in the building. Obviously, if it incurs further inconvenience or people going behind counters and that, whole different kettle of fish, and that would need to be considered in the lease. But where we own a toilet and it's connected with a premises, then I think it should be considered as policy. Considered.
It's a considered recommendation. I think everyone agrees it's been proposed and seconded and everyone's good. So we'll get that added in. Any further questions, comments to that report? No, everyone happy? Okay, we're happy to send that on. Okay, moving on to item number 8, the review of the overview and scrutiny panel work programme for 2023 to 24. I've got it written down. I'll discuss it earlier. Do members have any questions they would like to ask, comments they want to make? Councillor Green?
Well, I've got some suggestions to make on our programme. The first is I'm happy to support external grant funding review as our next scrutiny and investigation. Considering the remaining list, we've got 2 or 3 things here that relate to the planning department. One is a review of planning enforcement. The other is a review of Section 106 management. And I'd like to add a look at the new 10% biodiversity net gain that's just been incorporated into planning law. And I wondered if we could ask for an officer report on these in the first instance. And then we've got another item regarding protocols and procedures for emergency decisions that I think was proposed by Councillor Davies. I think this would be better done by Governance and Audit Committee, and I'd like to suggest that we recommend to them that they look at this. And the final one that we've got to consider is governance and performance of on-street parking income. I think that can be raised and will be raised through the parking review, so I don't think it needs to come here necessarily. And the final one, it was proposed that we ask for an update on externally funded regeneration projects, which hasn't happened, and I think we really need to press for regular updates on that. That was my comment.
Obviously, planning and enforcement review, we did have a officer report on that a little while back. I'm not sure if everyone was happy with that. I know there's still issues with that. I know in Birchington we're still getting a lot of non-communication over planning and enforcement. Maybe that needs looking at again. A review of Section 106, I think, definitely needs some sort. I mean, I'm in a ward where I'm getting 1,600 houses forced upon us, and I have the parish council asking me how they deal with this 106. I don't have a clue, and maybe we need to be looking at that management of that. So I agree with that. On-street parking income, I think lots of questions are asked at full council. I think we're all intrigued to know how that's going, because I still see that's the jobs even today are still not advertised for parking wardens.
No.
On our website.
No.
So maybe with that, the performance of on-street parking definitely needs looking at.
Chair.
Yeah.
With 106, could we also look at 106 monies, how much, what we've had in, what it was and what it's been spent on, and whether it's actually been spent on what it should have been spent on?
Yeah, that was intended to be part of the review.
Yeah, certainly when I have my look-aheads with Nick and Charles, I'll definitely put in these suggestions forward, yeah, definitely. So the external grant funding review, I know Councillor Austin was going to chair that. Did you manage to get your volunteers together?
I have Councillor Poe, I have Councillor Nunn as if we are allowed to co-opt him because he's not a regular member of the group. It would be good to have one other person, and then I think there are several officers that we would like to spend quite a bit of time with.
I just wanted to actually back up what Councillor Green said about we do need regular updates, because the volume, there's a huge amount of money being made available to this council, and we're very fortunate. Whether or not certain people want to do it, they should be keeping us in the loop and up to speed in order that this rolling process, because not all of the projects are going to be delivered, not all of them are viable, some are probably better than expected. But again, we've got a commitment, and again, after the Grant Thornton report, there's supposed to be transparency and, you know, good governance. Being kept in the dark and told what hasn't happened isn't good enough, and so I totally agree with Councillor Green that we need regular updates, which was actually agreed. I know you and I discussed this recently, but it was agreed that they would attend and give us an update. Well, don't see anyone here.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it's fair enough, fair comment. I mean, over the last few months, we've had all the big projects come to over in Scrutiny to look at for consultant fees.
And do we know where they are or whether they're likely to be delivered?
I know Bob's still here, because I know I have had conversations with Bob about regular reports. We haven't had anything this month at Scrutiny. Maybe for next month we can get a report on any progress that's happened for regeneration projects. Anything starting?
Oh yeah, they are, some of them yours, aren't they? Yeah, sorry.
There are some decisions related to the regeneration programme that are going to be coming up in the next cycle or two. So there'll be some reports coming here about some of those projects that can include some updates on where we are. And I know it said previously that, you know, where there are reports that are recommending procurement activities, that they are now coming here for all of those projects above the key decision threshold. And they need to include information about what's being delivered, how it's being procured, how much it's costing, and that sort of thing. So yeah, they will be coming.
Okay.
I think we're nearly there. Okay, moving on to item number 9 is the forward plan exempt cabinet decision list. Unless there's something from that plan the panel wish to discover, can members note the report? And that concludes the business for tonight's meeting. So I declare this meeting closed. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all to the officers who are now all gone, and Bob's still here. And I bid you all good night. Thank you.